Welcome to Nightward Echo. Tonight we uncover 5 true terrifying encounters of California's creepy legends, where sunlight fades, but the dark never leaves. Almost 90% of you listen and disappear without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Join the darkness. Subscribe now, kill the lights, silence the world, and let's begin. The first time I heard my name come back to me from the granite, it wasn't an echo. I know how echoes behave. I moved to the Park Service after college and lived alone in a little studio cabin tucked behind the maintenance yard near El Portal. I learned the rhythms of Yosemite like you learn a person you love, by weather, by scent, by the way it holds silence in its throat right before snow. That's what drew me out there, the silence, the sense of scale that made my own nerves seem small. That night, I was only a few weeks into my fall schedule, working evening patrols and logging trail cam footage for the backcountry. The valley was down to sweater weather. Big daylight crowds were gone and the sky fell early. I'd take my dinner in the truck and cruise, then end up at the office to pull cards and sort clips. A fox darting, a bear rolling, tourists drinking in no-go areas. Normal things. There's a stillness to the postseason. The convenience store in the village stays open late. And sometimes you can hear the coolers cycle on and off if you're walking from the lot to the office. That night the store was already dark. A thin cold rode the wind from the upper walls. You ever taste that damp stone smell after sunset? Like coins touched by river water. I could feel it fur on my tongue. The first odd thing was more annoyance than fear. 2 missed calls on the office landline, timestamps only a minute apart, 1:14 a.m. and 1:15 a.m., but no voicemail. The number was blocked. I shrugged, chewed a stale granola bar, and made a note to tell dispatch to ignore spam. The fluorescent light over my desk flickered when I sat. That light always flickered. I thumped it with a binder and it steadied into a persistent hum. Out of habit, I checked the whiteboard calendar. A red circle around Thursday, my day to hike the mist trail to the closed area past Vernal. A couple of campers had ignored signage the previous weekend. We were already in drought precautions. The metal stairs held weird patches of ice from shady runoff. You fall there at night, you don't get found until morning. I'd have to go up before sunrise to catch anyone sneaking a view. Before I left, I pulled the SD cards from the box marked Bridal 3 and Vernal 2 and slid the first one into the card reader. Footage flickered into a grid of stills. The office heater clicked and breathed and then fell quiet again. Not broken, just moody. I queued a batch convert and got up to grab another soda from the machine. My boots scuffed on cement. When I returned, a clip had auto-opened. It wasn't one from the marked locations. Fill a name, temp untitled. The info pane listed origin unknown. You know how compression sometimes makes things look like they're melting? This wasn't that. It was a still shot of the paved path behind the bathrooms at the lower falls, framed too low like the camera had been set on the ground. The first 30 seconds were motionless. Then something moved in the far left corner. Just a black sliver gliding by, not the sway of a coat, more the slowness of a pulled shadow. I dragged the progress bar forward and saw only one clear change. The light from the building, which should have cast a sharp triangle, seemed to lag behind itself like it was struggling to keep up. There was no sound. I checked the metadata again. No camera ID, no GPS. It wasn't in the system. I told myself some volunteer had done something wrong with a new trail cam and uploaded it to the wrong folder. I told myself that. Still, when I got in the truck to head home, the dashboard clock felt too bright in the dark cab like a lit eye. When I turned the key, the radio popped on and growled static for 1 second, just one, and then cut. I shook my head and laughed at myself, which sounded tight and stupid. The cabin's door likes to swing shut a few seconds after you let go. Loose hinge. But that night it did it twice. I went in, shrugged off my jacket, set the kettle on. The door pressed itself quietly into the frame like it was remembering how to be a door. Then, after I locked it, I heard it tap the jamb again, as if nudged from inside. The deadbolt didn't move. A breath of cold air slid under the sill and brushed my ankles like someone stroking past. I stood there with my phone in my hand, for no reason. That's embarrassing to type, but I did. I even glanced down to check for phantom notifications. The screen lit up with nothing. By morning, the valley was boiled milk fog and the trees stood like pencils jabbed through cotton. I layered up and drove to the trailhead, the truck heater blowing dry heat that smelled faintly burnt. When I stepped out, The soundscape felt wrong. Usually at dawn there's a high ring of birds that fades into water and distant tire hiss. That morning the water sounded thick, like it was falling through felt. I started up the mist. The metal of the guardrails was so cold it rang a little under my glove when I touched it. Past the footbridge, the ice patches were where I expected them, little glass shells hugging the stone. No one else was on the trail. When I reached the closed sign near the top, I found one set of footprints edging around it into the illegal section. If you work alone enough, you learn other people's boots by pressure pattern and length. These were medium, maybe men's 9. I called it in to a sleepy dispatch, told them I'd follow a little and turn around if it got bad. I crept around the sign. The granite stepped down slick and tilted. Mist veiled everything. My radio crackled. I adjusted the antenna and leaned in to hear. It wasn't dispatch. It was a single slow breath in my ear, not an audio glitch, a breath. The kind a person makes when they're trying not to speak. I went still. Frost tickled the rim of my nostrils. "Dispatch?" I said. A gust tugged my words thin static. Then my name, 2 syllables pulled like taffy. Lena. No one in the park says my name like that. I turned the radio off. I don't have a good reason. If you want me to be honest, I felt ashamed of how fast my heart went. I shoved the radio in my jacket pocket like a bad report card and kept going. Faster now, stupidly wanting to catch whoever had slipped around the sign. The prints kept distance between steps, then got narrower. At a slick bend, the left boot skidded and caught, and I could see the drag where a hand had slapped the rock. The prints spread out like a star. Beyond that, it was cleaner. I kept my left shoulder brushing the rock wall for balance, stared too long at the ice, looked up too fast, saw nothing in the mist, and then a figure. Just ahead, a human shape standing with its side to me, dark coat, hood up, not moving. "Hey," I called. "Trail's closed." "You can't," the figure started to turn. That's when I realized I couldn't hear the water. The falls were right there, 100 and something vertical feet of it, but the sound was behind glass, dulled and a half-second late. I stopped talking. The figure finished turning. There was no face under the hood. No, it's not that. There was a face. It just held wrong on the shape, like a sticker on a wrinkle. You know those lenticular cards that change as you tilt them? For 1 second it looked like someone I knew, and then someone else, and then someone I barely remembered seeing in a grocery store line when I was 6. My brain made a sound I have never made with my throat. The thing lifted one hand. The sleeve hung too long, hiding the fingers. It tilted the hand toward the granite wall and did something, like giving a small push to the air. The mist moved, but not the way mist moves. It peeled back as if it had been pinned there with invisible pins. And I could see a little alcove in the rock, just barely a slit. The thing pointed its face wrong toward me without exactly moving. I stumbled backward and hit the ice with the heel of my boot. I slammed my shoulder into the wall to catch myself. Cold cracked up my spine. "Don't," I said without meaning to say it to anyone. My hand fumbled with the radio. "This is Supervisor Lena St. I need a unit at Mist. Possible." I didn't know what to say instead of possible person. By the time my mouth got around the word, the thing had stepped slow and smooth to the alcove. It slid sideways through stone and was gone. You wouldn't have followed, would you? Please tell me you wouldn't, because I did. I went to the slit in the rock where it had vanished and pressed my palm to the granite. It was colder than the air everywhere else, as if the stone in that exact shape had spent the night under ice. There was nothing to see inside the crack but darkness. The sound of the falls came back, shuddering in like it had been allowed to return. On the way down, I kept turning around to see if something was behind me. Twice I slid and barked my shin on rock. Once I heard distant footsteps not in sync with mine. When I stopped and counted, they stopped. Down by the footbridge, a group of sunrise photographers had finally arrived, all bright jackets and heavy lenses. They laughed too loud. Their breaths fogged the air, and for a giddy moment I felt stupid for being afraid. The world reset to the pace of feet and camera shutters. I nodded to them and kept going. The false safety didn't last long. Back in the office, I checked the call log on the desk phone. That blocked number had rung twice more while I was on the trail, 3:04 a.m. and 3:05 a.m., and this time there was a voicemail. 10 seconds long, no discernible words. A low hush. If you've ever had someone you love exhale while you're holding the phone to their chest, you know the sound. But under it was a faint tin rattle, like a chain being dragged very slowly across something hollow. I don't know why I hit save. When I pulled the new SD card from Vernal 2, I braced for nonsense and still wasn't ready. The camera had been pointed out across the guardrail at nothing interesting but trees and a slice of trail. The previous night's clips were uneventful. At 1:13 a.m., a figure stepped into frame. Dark hood, too slow step, exactly the shape I'd watched on the trail. It halted dead center and turned to face the lens. The hood gaped. The still held for 3 seconds. Then the most ordinary thing happened in the most wrong way. The camera made its little infrared blink, a tiny LED red. That blink showed up on the footage as a little red dot reflected in the hood, like a pupil. The figure lifted the sleeve-covered hand, reached toward the lens, and the image cut. Next clip, 1:14 a.m., same position, but the very first frame zoomed, as if the camera had moved a foot closer without being touched. No animal, no wind jostle. Just nearer. The reflection dot sat impossibly steady. I copied the video to my desktop so fast I almost dropped the mouse. The rest of the week slid by the way weeks do when you stop sleeping. Sounds became sides. The office light flickered progressively more. The heater clicked at odd intervals. I started carrying my radio in my back pocket even around my own cabin. Little things stacked up and didn't feel little. At home, my phone screen would light up on the table with no notification. I'd see it in the corner of my eye and turn, and it would be black again. Twice, maybe 3 times. I woke up to voices talking in the next room at that too late tone, 2 or 3 a.m., the hour when voices get small and careful. When I crept out of bed to find the source, the sound swam away like it was a room over from wherever I was. Then silence. I started leaving my TV on low for company. Only sometimes the closed captions would roll a half-second ahead of the muted voices. Is it crazy that the small things were worse than the big? That breathing on my radio felt less unreal than my bathroom mirror briefly filming over from one corner. Like someone had exhaled slowly from behind the glass, it felt targeted the 5th night. I'd been going through security footage with a coworker, Gabe, who didn't believe in anything he couldn't fix with a wrench. We agreed to grab late food from the employee cafe. It was quiet at that hour. The coffee tasted like hot paper. The big windows made us feel like fish in a tank. He was telling me about his brother's divorce when my phone buzzed. An unknown number. It rang exactly once and stopped. 2:53 a.m., spam, he said without looking. We can block. It rang again once, stopped, same minute. You know that feeling when your lungs forget how big they are and take in a smaller breath than they need? That. The third ring came a minute later and the name on the screen had changed to my full name, the one on my ID badge, not the one my friends use. The call ended before I could swipe. Okay, Gabe said, slow, half amused, half looking for the joke I was playing. Weird. In the reflection on the cafe window, I could see us both. I could also see the silhouette of a third person sitting at a table behind us. There wasn't anyone behind us. I turned, no one. I looked back at the reflection and realized that the silhouette wasn't shaped like either of us. It was turned a little toward me, hood up, sleeve long, and I tried to make my eyes lie to me. It was closer in the reflection than it should have been, as if the glass was showing a room that ran right up against our backs. Do you see that? I asked. See what? He said, then he saw it. The way his mouth stopped was so clean you could hear it click. He stood without scraping the chair and stepped toward the window. He lifted his right hand to touch the glass. The cafe's automatic lights clicked off in the hallway, and for a fraction of a second the window went full mirror. The silhouette tilted its covered hand up like it saw him. The lights hummed back on. Nothing. Just our own faces, a little paler. We should go, he said. His voice had a hollow to it. We left too fast, like kids, pretended to laugh in the parking lot. He offered me a ride and I said no, stubborn about my truck being 10 feet away. When I got home, I pulled the shades down all the way and slid a chair under the door handle. That night was the first time I dreamed about the granite breathing. Slow, huge breaths the way a sleeping animal breathes. In the dream, the valley floor rose and fell like a chest under an old quilt of trees. When I woke, my room held a smell I don't have a name for. Mineral, cold, and faintly sweet like wet stone and sap. The clock read 3:17 a.m. There was a small sound in the kitchen. A soft, delayed click. The door? I lay still with one hand under the pillow holding nothing. Ridiculous protection. The sound came again. A shutter or a latch moving back into place a few seconds after it should have. I counted too fast. In my chest, my heart did that little rabbit thump I know from being on cliffs. I waited until dawn smeared the room gray. Then I got up and found nothing out of place except for my phone lying face down on the counter, even though I was sure I'd left it charging by the bed. When I turned it over, the last call list had 2 new entries with no numbers. The label on both said in small gray letters, "Unknown, voicemail 010. No voicemail icon. I tapped and the system told me there was nothing to play. In any sane world, this is where I'd have taken a few days. In any sane world, I'd have left. But I still believed if I did my job, the ground under my life would hold. That afternoon, I drove up to the overlook by tunnel view to replace a camera we'd had trouble with. The day was clear. The granite shone. Down below, tourists breathed clouds into the air and pointed. I parked behind the trees and hauled the case up the small slope. The fallen needles made that softened crunch underfoot, the sound of footsteps in a borrowed museum. The camera housing sat in shade. When I unscrewed the back, something in the casing rattled in a way it wasn't supposed to. I tipped it and a small black object slid into my glove. A SIM tray-sized rectangle, plastic, no markings. I'm not an electronics expert, IT guy, yes, I know. But this wasn't standard issue. I checked the data card, it had been swapped or copied. Or both. I slipped the card into my pocket and closed up the housing. On the way back to the truck, I felt watched. The old cliché. But listen. Your body can be wrong and still be telling you something true. The wind was steady from the west. The old leaves clacked in a way that sounded like careful fingers. The hair on the back of my neck felt like it was being lifted and set down again, as if someone expected to find something written there. Back in my cabin that evening, I put the trail cam card into my laptop and cued it to fast scan. The first 3 days were normal. Families in puffy jackets, a lost hat uneventfully reunited with a head. On the 4th night at 2:12 a.m., the camera caught someone walking just outside the frame. Only a shoulder and a hood and the edge of an arm. The angle moved a 1/4 inch, just enough for the hood to be more central in the next clip. And then at 2:13 a.m., the camera recorded me. I was sleeping in my cabin. The same bedspread. The same crooked picture frame I hadn't fixed. The clip was 10 seconds, infrared, grain strong. You could see me turn once onto my side. In the lower right, the timestamp read exactly 2:13:07 a.m. There was no camera in my bedroom. There was no camera. I backed away from the screen so fast I almost knocked the chair over. My throat made a tiny fish gulp. I slapped my hand to my chest because it felt like my heart had stepped sideways. For a long minute I sat face down at the table, forehead on the wood, listening. The cabin holds sound oddly. Pipes tick. The small fridge hums, then stalls like a swallowed word. Someone above me, no one above me, stepped carefully and waited. The room held its breath with me. When I looked up, my phone screen lit up by itself. No notification, just on. A bright blank rectangle. You might think I ran. I didn't. I did what I do when I don't know what else to do. I documented. I took a photo of the screen. I took a photo of my phone, lit up with nothing on it. I took a photo of the door with the chair under it. A dumb instinct. Proof for later that my expanded fear had been justified. At 3 a.m., my radio, forgotten on the counter, clicked very softly. A voice right against the diaphragm. Lena. Pause. Stop looking. I couldn't tell if the voice was male or female. Ageless. It had the quality of a voice recorded inside a pocket. The way fabric narrows a word. I picked up the radio with a shaking hand. Who is this? Silence. The silence extended past when my mind expected it to. You know how we fill silence with assumptions of what it will be? This wasn't that. This was blank. Then, almost politely, stop. And over the word stop came a faint scraping like something moving one room over that has no walls. I yanked the batteries out. I put them on the table. The radio stayed on for 1 second longer than it should have, then died. Not all of this makes for a good ghost story. Some of it makes for a slow breakdown. The next day I told my supervisor a watered version. Weird calls. Strange footage. He frowned and said tourists hack things now for fun. He said prank apps can make your phone look like it received calls from your own name. Kids do that. He said without saying, maybe I needed to talk to someone. I nodded. I went back to the office and cleaned my desk until the surface looked like a hospital sheet. The light hummed. The heater sighed. In the hallway, a door closed a few seconds after someone had passed. 2 weeks. That's how long it stretched into half-normal life. In that time, I tried to outpace it. I ran the valley loop before sunrise 3 days in a row. My breath burned cold in my throat. My fingers went numb. I played comedy podcasts until the laughter sounded edged. I learned which shadows always settled slower than they should. The one cast by the coat rack by my door. The one that dripped down the corner where the ceiling seam was. The one that pooled where my boots sat. I set my phone to airplane mode before bed. Still, some nights at 3 a.m. the screen lit. This part is the part I'm embarrassed about. I called the unknown number back. It was a Tuesday. Rain had started, a clean, steady curtain. I was parked near the river turning brown. The call history showed 3 single-ring misses. My finger hovered, then pressed. The first time I got a dead tone and the call ended itself at exactly 8 seconds. The second time a voice answered. Lena, it said, like an appointment being kept. Stop looking. And then, so faint I don't know if I heard it or made it up, my mother's laugh. The exact laugh she used when she thought she'd dropped something behind the couch and found it again. A soft oh, relieved at the small saving of time. My mother died 8 years ago. I hung up so hard the phone slipped from my hand and hit the floor. When I picked it up, the call had saved to the log with a location tag, near Tunnel View. That night, I didn't go to the cabin. I slept in the office on the couch, a blanket over my shoulder, a lamp on. The building's ducts clicked and scraped. Twice, the hallway lights flickered, and the motion sensor on the back door showed a reading with no camera match. I drifted into that half-sleep that feels like drunk water. I woke at 3:11 a.m. to the distinct sound of slow breathing from behind the office mirror. The cheap one hung to the right of the desk. I stared at it until dawn, wrapped in the blanket like a person disappearing. The climax wasn't cinematic. It came on damp and ordinary. Gabe met me on Friday to exchange a data drive. He said we should hike the Cathedral Lakes Trail on our day off. He said clumsily, "You can sleep at my place if," and then glanced away as if he'd made the wrong offer. I wanted to say yes so badly I felt childish. I said no because no sounded normal. We went to the lower falls to check a sign. Tourists milled. The sound of water was crisp and timed right. We leaned over the railing, and he started telling me about how he'd fixed his brother's truck with a coat hanger. I felt the first drop on my right wrist, then another. Not rain, too sparse. Water condensing from mist on the rail and falling in thick ticks. It sounded like a small clock with a tired spring. "Hold up," he said. He tilted his head. "Do you hear?" We both heard it at once. My name, not booming, not the fake boom of the cliffs. From lower, like someone standing in the culvert under our feet. "Lena," it said in the not voice. "Stop!" The crowd around us rustled. A child laughed. Someone's camera beeped. The air chilled. The hair along my forearm lifted. The water noise seemed to pull back a fraction of a second again. The concrete under our boots felt, not thin exactly, uncertain. "Okay," he said, taking my elbow, like we were leaving a family reunion where someone had had too much to drink. We backed away, slow. The voice didn't follow. It didn't need to. It had brought everything closer. That night, a thumb drive slid under my cabin door. No envelope. Just the drive. The door trembled closed a second later than it should have. If you're shouting at me through this page to throw it into the river, I get it. I plugged it in. Of course I did. The drive held one folder. My name spelled with the full middle initial the Park Service uses. Inside were 10 clips and 2 still photos. The photos were of the inside of my cabin. One showed my bed from close enough that you could count the stitches on the hem of my pillowcase. The other showed the front of my bathroom mirror. A handprint fogged the lower corner from the wrong side. The 10 clips were from places I frequented in the park. One from the employee cafe window, showing my reflection and the third silhouette like a shadow on the glass. One from the maintenance yard gate, showing me walking in at dawn while a split second slower. A darker second me peeled away from my left shoulder like a sleeve being removed. One from the office nowhere that had a camera, recording me at my desk as I watched something on my laptop with my mouth open, my eyes wide and stupid. The 9th was from the mist trail at night, a hooded figure walking into the glitch of the water. The 10th I almost didn't click. It was my childhood bedroom. The wallpaper, yellow with little gray squares. The whale poster over the bed. The angle was from the doorway, but the door wasn't open. It was the closed door itself looking in. The whole clip was black except where the tiniest sliver showed through where the latch didn't seat all the way. Through that slit, you could see a line of gray light across carpet. The view didn't change. Not even the small movement you get when someone holds a camera. 10 seconds of a child's sideways room through a door crack. Then it ended. My phone lit up on the counter. No notification. I sat down on the floor. I felt guilty. Don't ask me to make sense of that. I felt guilty for bringing whatever this was into the valley with my attention. Like my looking was the thing that opened the door. I thought of my mother's I thought of the slit in the granite. I felt a weird urge to apologize. The Park Service doesn't cover hauntings. Our manual's incident reports don't have codes for this. I wrote one anyway. I took it to the office and put it in my supervisor's inbox. I don't know what he thinks of me now. I moved out of the cabin 2 weeks later. I got an apartment in Mariposa on a street where the neighbors could see my front door. I wrote my name on a mailbox with a Sharpie. I bought heavier curtains. I stopped running before dawn. I stopped going up the mist. I do my job in daylight. I try not to check data by myself after midnight. I return calls only to numbers I recognize. I keep my radio on a shelf facing the wall, but some nights at exactly 3 a.m., my phone lights. Not a ring, just a sudden pale square as if someone breathes gently on the screen from behind the glass. On those nights, I hear a door in someone else's hallway close a few seconds later than it should. On those nights, I make myself remember that silence is full of choices. I make myself breathe normally. My chest tightens anyway. I don't go to tunnel view anymore if I can help it. The trees there know the shape of my name too well. The granite holds too much breath. The shadows still move with that lag if you watch them long enough, and sometimes the valley makes this sound at night, a low, patient scrape across something deep that I can't explain with wind or water. Maybe you hate me for not leaving entirely. Maybe you'd have done the smart thing. Would you have done the smart thing? Would you have burned the drive, smashed the phone, drowned the radio in the Merced? Or would you have listened one more time, just to be sure you heard what you thought you heard? If you hike there in the off-season, if the light is low and the air feels a degree colder than it should, you might hear it too. A breath where no one stands. A voice that uses your name like it knows where you kept your childhood posters. If your phone ever rings once at 3 a.m. and stops, don't call back. They tell the story wrong. It isn't the smile you have to worry about. It's the moment right before. The tiny tilt of the head, the listening. Like she's waiting for you to choose. I didn't know that when I started the drive. I thought I was just headed home. I was living in Los Banos then, teaching part-time at the community college, picking up weekend shifts at the warehouse in Gilroy because rent didn't care about my schedule. Anyone who's taken the 152 through Pacheco Pass knows the stretch I mean, where the hills feel like sleeping animals and the wind starts to push your car sideways. There's a reservoir on one side that always looks colder than it should be, even in August, like the sun never gets down into it. I'd started using that road so often I could have described every reflector post by memory. That night I left the warehouse around 11:40 p.m. A few boxes of produce and a company fleece tossed in the back. The smell of garlic and cardboard baked into my skin. It was one of those nights with a low, moving fog like a tide rolling in from nowhere. The streetlights in the lot had halos around them and the air bit through the fleece. When I unlocked the truck, I could hear the cooling engine of someone else's sedan making those little ticking sounds. Somewhere an insect buzzed against a light, then dropped silent. I sat in the cab, checked my messages, one from my sister, time-stamped 10:06. Call me tomorrow, need to run something by you. Set Waze just out of habit. The app told me what the clock already had. I'd make it home a little after 12:30 if the pass wasn't closed for construction. I rubbed my eyes and started the engine. The first miles were ordinary. The empty tilt of Gilroy's outlet signs, the dark fields, the hum of tires on asphalt. I set the radio low to one of those AM stations that just barely reaches you, the voices all static and salt. I like the company of voices. I don't like silence in cars. It feels like someone else is listening. I took the turn for 152. The one that dips under the overpass and then snakes up into the black cut of the hills. My phone buzzed once, a calendar reminder, and then lit up without showing anything new. No notification, just the screen breathing awake and falling back asleep. It does that sometimes, I told myself. By the time I hit the first climb, the fog thickened into a white sheet dragging across the road. It wasn't the usual patchy kind. It was heavy, saturated like wool. The guardrails flashed silver and vanished. The lines on the road pulled close. If you've ever had that moment where you can only see as far as your headlights paint, you know the claustrophobia of it. It felt like I was driving through a tunnel made entirely of weather. Then came the first odd thing. At the turnout by the Big Rock, I only know it as the Big Rock, the one locals paint and repaint, there was a shape in the fog that I first took for a road sign someone had twisted. Tall, pale, no reflective tape. It resolved into a person as I drew near. A woman in a light dress that looked wrong for the cold, hair wet or slicked to her head, standing just off the shoulder with her arms hanging straight down. She wasn't facing me. She was angled slightly away like she'd been walking and had paused. I couldn't see her shoes. I flicked my brights maybe out of reflex, and in the wash of white I saw her head turn. Just a little. Like she was listening, the radio hissed. One of the static voices broke off mid-word, then came back like it had swallowed water. My phone screen lit again. 12:07 a.m. The temperature reading dropped from 54 to 51 in 1 second, like the car had driven into a mouth. I rolled my window up the last inch and put my hands at 10 and 2, suddenly very aware of the road's narrowness. I didn't hit the brakes. I tell myself that when I can't sleep. I didn't slow down, but I did look in the rear view. She was still there, farther back now, just a vertical impression in the fog. Then she wasn't. Then she was again, closer by 2 posts, like a jump cut my brain couldn't place. I breathed out. I could taste something metallic. A lot of people would have stopped. Would you? If someone looked like they needed help at midnight on that road, would you? I still don't know what the right answer is. I just know that I gripped the wheel until my nails left half-moons in the plastic, and I told myself, it's just fog. People look like whatever your eyes want to see in fog. The next 3 miles were empty. The wind funneled through the cut in the hills and the truck wobbled. I had that weird sense of the road tilting when you know it isn't tilting. That little vertigo that makes you aware of your stomach. I passed the pull-off where truckers sometimes park to sleep. It was bare, no taillights, no stray cigarette embers. The reservoir was a black mirror with no edges. A smell crept into the cab, faint but definite. Lake water and something sweet, like wilted flowers left in a warm room. I cracked the window to let it out, then pulled it up again when the cold air slapped the side of my face so hard my eyes watered. The wind had a voice in it. Not words, just a shape, like breath trying to become language. My right ear clogged like on a descent in a plane. At the crest of the pass, there's a short, straight stretch where you can sometimes see the lights of cars coming from the other way, before they dip and disappear. That night there was nothing. It felt like the world had ended somewhere behind me, and I hadn't seen the sign. The AM station flickered and went silent. My dash cam, cheap hardwired, mostly there to make my insurance company happy, made a little chime that it only makes when it detects an incident, whatever that means, and starts a protected recording. I hadn't hit anything. I hadn't even changed lanes. The red dot in the corner of the screen glowed steadily. My phone screen lit up again. This time it opened on its own to the call log. The last call placed was unknown, Uriwar at 12:09 a.m. The timestamp sat there like a bruise. I hadn't touched my phone. It was in the cradle. My thumb hovered over the screen, not touching it like proximity alone could smudge the log into something normal. I took a breath to steady my hands, and the breath fogged the inside of the windshield in a small oval, like a mouth print. I wiped it with the back of my hand and made a greasy smear. I told myself, pull off at the scenic overlook. Breathe. Check the dash cam. See if you imagined the woman. Put 1 minute between you and that log entry where the math makes sense again. I used my blinker like a person in a driver's ed video and eased onto the gravel. If you've never stopped there at night, I don't recommend it. The guardrail keeps you from falling into a blackness that your brain interprets as depth, even if you can't see it. The brush whispers. The reservoir, even unseen, feels like a witness. I cut the engine and immediately wanted it on again. Without the vibration, the truck felt thin as a soda can. The ticking sound of the cooling metal was too loud. Fog rolled across the hood and thinned out. Rolled and thinned. Rolled and... A single, slow knock on the passenger window. I froze. Then I laughed out loud because I had my keys in my hand and the doors were locked, and knocks are the stupidest thing to be afraid of if you're a rational adult. A twig dropped from the trees, I told myself. A bird, the sound of cooling glass. I stretched across the seat and looked. The passenger window was a rectangle of fog and my own face reflected back too pale in the dashboard glow. The faintest smear ran in a half circle across the glass. Not down like rain. Sideways like a finger drawn through moisture. I've thought about this a lot since. How your body makes decisions before your brain. My hand was on the ignition, turning. Before I'd even framed the thought of leaving, the truck thundered back to life. I threw it in drive. The headlights carved out two swords of white into the fog and illuminated nothing. Just the silver line of the guardrail and the sign for the overlook and the little trash can with its lid crooked. I pulled back onto the road, a little too fast. Gravel popped and skittered. The back end of the truck fishtailed and then found traction. I kept my eyes forward. Don't check your mirrors when you're afraid of what's behind you. That's a rule I invented just then and believed like religion. I made it to the downhill portion, where the road turns to a series of careful S's. The wind wasn't as bad on this side, and the fog lifted in pockets that showed me the absolute absence of traffic anywhere around me. The clock read 12:16. My hands had stopped shaking. I was doing 35 and no more. The smell of lake water was gone. The sweet undertone remained, cloying in the fleece. Night air seeped through the seal around the door and sat cold on my ankle. Then the phone lit and buzzed. Hard, a sustained vibrate like an alarm, and the screen filled with a FaceTime request from an email address that had no name. The only visible text was the first few characters, Lake 152, and then truncated into the corner by the button that said accept. No, absolutely not. The sound continued, that fake, cheerful digital trill. The kind that makes you feel observed even if no one is there. I didn't touch it, I waited. After 3 rings, it stopped. The screen went black. I breathed again. Then the screen lit and showed a missed FaceTime entry at 12:16 a.m., duration 0:0. No contact photo, just a gray circle with a letter that didn't match anything. I don't know why that detail bothers me so much. Maybe because it was like the phone wanted to give it an initial and couldn't. You can call me a coward, but I swear this, I would have kept going slow and careful, and I would have made it to Los Banos with a story about fog and a weird call and maybe a joke about ghosts that you tell to make yourself feel bigger than fear. But the road curved around a hill and the fog drew back momentarily like a curtain, and the high beams caught a shape in the lane ahead. A stopped car, driver's door open, hazard lights flashing without rhythm like someone had kicked the relay. It was a small, older sedan, beige or gold with one of those dealership plates instead of a proper one. The door hung wider than it should have on the hinge. I braked to a hard stop about 30 feet behind it. There were scuff marks on the road, dark lines like someone had dragged a heavy bag across, angling away toward the guardrail. But there was no second car, no debris. The hazard lights clicked slower than a heartbeat. I turned my own hazards on and sat there, engine idling, trying to rationalize a stranger's half-told story. Maybe a deer, maybe a breakdown, maybe someone had gotten scared and walked for help. The AM radio hissed back to life, then sizzled out again. I could hear my own breathing and the truck's cooling fans and the absolute total unforgiving quiet of the hills. I got out. I don't know what kind of person gets out in that situation. I just know that I'm the kind of person who would feel worse if I found out later there had been someone alive in that car, and I'd kept going. The air hit my face with a slap. The fog made a sound, a faint hiss like carbonating water. The gravel under my boots was wet and stuck, then released with a soft tear when I lifted my feet. I walked with my phone's flashlight up, the beam bouncing and coming back at me. I called out, not loud, not a shout, because the idea of being answered loudly felt worse than being answered soft. Hello, you need help? The smell of sweet flowers intensified, undercut by something sour, like algae or old pennies. A few feet from the open door, the smell was all there was. My eyes watered. A small moth tapped the phone screen and stuck for a second, then vibrated away. I leaned and looked into the car. The interior light didn't come on. My phone's beam showed a cloth seat worn smooth and shiny, a cracked cup holder with a paper straw wrapper in it, a floor mat with a stain the shape of a leaf. There was a purse on the passenger seat, the strap twisted once, a little medal of some saint pinned to it. No one in the back. No one crouched. No keys in the ignition. The hazards were flashing because the button was stuck half depressed. The word hazard worn off, so it just read HA. On the floor behind the driver's seat was a pair of flats. Neatly placed side by side, I said too softly, "Hello?" From the ravine beyond the guardrail, the faintest answering sound, not a voice. The sound of breath, not exhale. Inhale like the hill itself had nostrils. My chest went tight and small. The flashlight trembled. A drop of fog condensed on the phone and rolled, smeared, then refocused the beam. My brain reminded me that sometimes animals sound like people if you're primed to hear them. The small logic isn't there to save you. It's there so you can move your legs. I did something I would and do call stupid. I walked to the guardrail and peered over. There was nothing to see. Just the brush. The thin, bright gray of fog like a river down there, the hint of water beyond it. But a little lower, right at the level of the guardrail where the metal had collected dew, were 4 clean, round places where the condensation had been wiped away. 4 fingers, like someone had rested a hand there to climb over. My phone vibrated in my hand. I almost dropped it into the ravine. The screen lit to show a notification. Motion detected, front cam, 12:20 a.m. My apartment's cheap little Wi-Fi door camera, which only ever sends me false alarms when a moth flies too close or a cat walks past, had detected motion at exactly the time I was standing on a mountain, feeling the world hold its breath. I might have laughed if my throat had been open. Instead, I swallowed air that tasted like a basement. I backed away from the rail, the way you back away from a dog you don't want to spook. I told the empty sedan out loud, "I'm calling 911," because it felt like both a courtesy and an excuse to retreat. I got into the truck with controlled movements like I thought the vehicle could smell panic. I locked the doors and left the engine running. When I looked up, the hazard lights of the sedan had stopped. The click stopped too, mid-cycle. I hadn't touched it. The world got measurably darker by 1 notch. I dialed. The call failed. Reasonable, I told myself. The pass dropped service. The truck's hands-free made a polite beep sound as if to agree. The dash cam chimed again, that incident noise. And a microsecond later a third chime like it had started a new clip immediately after the last. I stared into the camera lens as if a person could be on the other side of it. My own reflection looked thin, stretched across something angled wrong. I put the truck in gear. I pulled into the opposing lane to go around the stopped car. The beam of my headlight slid across its windshield and found something behind the glass that made my body do that small shudder, like when you almost fall asleep and your muscles spasm. On the inside of the windshield, from the passenger side toward the middle, there was a smear like a handprint dragged sideways. Fingers splayed. The marks were clean through the condensation, trails of clear within fogged-over glass. The angle didn't make sense. The line seemed to pull toward the driver's seat. I didn't look long. I couldn't. I kept going. The fog thinned as I moved lower, enough that I could see the road unwind ahead like a ribbon. I kept my speed at 30. My phone buzzed again with the same motion alert from my apartment, second one within a minute, which had never happened before, and I changed the settings mechanically so it would start recording a clip I could see later. The idea of later felt luxurious. The idea of later felt like hubris. But I needed the structure of procedure, if that makes sense. There's a little gas station where 152 meets 33, the kind that closes at 10 but leaves the lights on. I pulled in. That place has seen so many versions of me, exhausted, broke, late. I parked under the overhang because the fluorescent tubes made a zone of ugly safety. The insects were in a frenzy around them, batting their bodies against the plastic. Inside the convenience store dark, a single person moved. The clerk on night inventory. He didn't look up. I sat and turned every camera I had, dashcam, phone, toward myself like a person making a confession. I watched the footage from the drive in a sped-up flipbook of gray and white. I watched because I wanted the mundane lie. You imagine that. The feed didn't give it to me. At 12:07:13, as I passed the turnout with the painted rock, the dashcam picks up the shape at the roadside. Pale, tall, slightly blurred by fog, yes, but distinct enough that my brain doesn't have to work. She doesn't face the camera. She listens. There's a 6-second clip the camera saves flagged incident. I watched it 10 times. On the last watch, as the truck moves past, there's a moment, a single frame, maybe 2, where you can see the very edge of her face. Not a face, exactly. Not features. The hint of wet hair. The pale field where a cheek should be. There's a texture there that's wrong. Matte where skin should be shiny with fog, like paper that's been dried and smoothed with a hand. At 12:16, Between the S-curves, the dashcam microphone records 3 soft noises. Too soft to hear over the engine unless you're looking for them. A long inhale, a fingernail tapping twice against plastic, and another inhale. The view doesn't change. There's no one in the cab but me. Then at 12:20, as I pass the stopped sedan, the camera's G-sensor triggers from nothing I can see or feel. The frame stutters. The lights of the hazard flash once more, a light I did not see with my own eyes. Then the file ends and a protected clip begins. I watched all that in an island of bright humming light, breathing too shallow to get nut aftertaste out of my mouth. Then I opened the apartment camera app. 2 clips had uploaded. The first showed the building's front steps at 12:26. No one climbed them. No one crossed the frame. But the porch light did something I'd never seen it do. It dimmed and brightened with the quality of a person walking beneath it in intervals. The second clip was only 3 seconds and showed the edge of my door, the cheap doormat with the pineapple my sister bought to invite prosperity, and the darkness of the hall to either side. Somewhere in those 3 seconds, if you look at the reflection in the peephole, and you have to want to look, you have to force yourself, you can see the suggestion of a longer shape where only the squat of the opposite wall should be. The distortion is vertical, like someone very tall leaned close. Then it's gone. Would you have gone home? Would you have driven somewhere with people and noise and made a new plan for your life? I wish I could say that's what I did. I told myself like a good citizen that I had to report the car. That whoever had left those shoes and that handprint might be dangerously cold or injured. The station's landline hung behind the counter, but when I went to ask the clerk to use it, he startled like I'd come up from the floor. He was young, buzz-cut, a lanyard with a badge clipped to his shirt that said Nate. He blinked at me like he had to bring my shape into existence. "You got anyone else here?" I asked, an opener that made me sound like an auditor or a cop. He looked at the camera that wasn't monitoring this part of the store and shook his head. "Just me, man. We're closed. I need to call something in," I said. "There's an abandoned car on the pass. I couldn't get service up there." He slid the phone toward me without letting go of it completely, like a parent handing scissors to a child. Maybe I looked crazy. Maybe I was. I dialed. The call rang and a calm voice answered, and I gave the location as best I could and the details in a low voice, and the woman on the other end said someone would check it out. Then she paused and said, "Sir, are you safe right now?" That question did something to me. I said, "I'm under lights." She said, "Good." As I handed the phone back, Nate squinted at my shoulder and then at the door as the bell chimed for no reason. He said very quietly, "Did you get caught in the fog up there?" "I did," I said. He swallowed. The skin on his neck fluttered. "My uncle says don't stop." He moved a pen from one side of the counter to the other. "Justin, don't stop." "I didn't," I said. It wasn't entirely true. "Thanks for the phone." He nodded, eyes moving in a way that made me think of small animals scenting air. "You want coffee?" "I want to go home," I said, and then heard how childlike that sounded. "Sorry. Long night." Back in the truck, I put the drive in motion like a ritual. The remaining miles to Los Banos are flat and straight, fields on either side stitched by irrigation canals. The occasional farmhouse lit like a ship. The fog was less here, though, that's what I told myself. It didn't press against the glass the same way. The radio found a preacher talking about the sound of trumpets at the end of days, and I changed the station until all I had was someone selling used cars in Merced. The clock read 12:37 when I turned into my apartment complex. I know there are people who don't believe in the intelligence of buildings, but mine knew I was scared. It creaked exactly once in the hallway, a sound I'd always ignored before, and it sounded like an inhale there too. My door was closed, the deadbolt still horizontal. The doormat's pineapple smiled at me like it would work this time. The porch light buzzed. Small suicidal insects flung themselves against the globe. Inside, everything smelled faintly of cleaning product and my neighbor's onion soup. The thermostat read 68. I shut the door and double-locked it and told myself I'd shower, then scrub my brain of the night with something you scroll without thinking. I dropped my keys in the bowl. The bowl made a clink that sounded like a dropped coin in a well. I took my shoes off by towing them away. I turned on the bathroom light and it flickered once, then held. Steam rose from the shower. The normalcy of water on skin almost made me cry. I could feel heat returning to my scalp where it had been cold. I could feel my fingers prune. I listened for other sounds and heard only pipes and the whine of the vent fan. The mirror fogged. On that blurred surface, the habit of a child came back. I drew a line with my fingertip, a curve like a smile, an eye, another. Then I remembered the handprint on the windshield, and I wiped hard with a towel until the smiling face disappeared. I turned off the water. The fan's pitch shifted as it spun down. In the quiet after, there was a sound. If you grew up in a house with siblings, you know it. The sound of someone's bare feet on carpet carefully avoiding the creaks. Not loud, not heavy, just the faint brush shift of weight. It came from the living room, then stopped right outside the bathroom door where the carpet meets the threshold tile. I stood with one hand on the towel at my waist, my heart twitching against my ribs like a caught fish, my throat so tight it hurt. The door was open 4 inches, and in the sliver of space the hallway looked like every hallway looks after midnight. Too long. The corners more than corners, the ceiling a little lower. I told myself what we all tell ourselves. If someone was actually there, I would know it. My eyes would adjust. My brain would find the edges. I waited. The air moved against my wet skin like a hand pulled back. I said lightly, as if I were absurd and wanted to put myself at ease by naming it. Hello? The quiet answered with a new sound. My phone on the kitchen counter lighting up and buzzing once the way it does when someone sends a text and the preview doesn't show who. It buzzed again, a double. Then the screen lit and went dark without showing any icons or numbers. I looked at my reflection in the black glass of the bathroom mirror and thought, I am not alone. I don't know how much of that was metaphor. I stepped out into the hallway, still damp, my hand gripping the towel too tight. The living room was empty. The couch had the indentation of my usual seat. The table held my keys and wallet and the mail I'd forgotten to toss. The kitchen lights were off, but the microwave clock glowed green. 12:48. My phone lay screen down. The back camera stared up like a blind eye. I flipped it and saw the lock screen. 3 missed calls from unknown at 12:43, 12:44, and 12:46. Beneath them, a notification from the door camera. Motion detected, 12:46. I swiped. The clip loaded. It showed my door from the hallway side. For the first second, nothing. Then the porch light dimmed the way it had at the gas station, as if a tall person had moved under it. The fisheye lens bent the world weirdly. The mat's pineapple stretched. The frame wavered. There was no person, only a shift in brightness and a brief shadow that didn't have a body to cast it. Then, and I hate this part, I hate thinking about it, the doormat bulged in the middle as if 2 bare feet had pressed down from beneath, standing exactly on the pineapple's eyes. The bulge rose an inch and then collapsed. The clip ended. I told myself I'd call my sister. I told myself I'd say something casual like, "Can I come over?" and let my own voice convince me I was being dramatic. When I opened the call log, another entry had been added beneath the unknown calls. A call from my number, to my number, 12:47 a.m., duration 0001. I don't remember pressing that. I don't remember hearing my own voice in my own ear. The note icon next to the call had an arrow, as if it had been recorded for voicemail. But when I tapped, there was only empty space and a timestamp. 0001, silence. Do you know how much a second weighs when you're trying to listen to it? I didn't sleep that night. I watched the feed from the door until the battery on the little camera died, and the app served me a half-hearted error. I put a chair under the doorknob because that's the kind of thing movies teach you, and it felt like I was participating in my own survival. I went to the bedroom and sat with my back to the wall where I could see both the door and the window. Somewhere around 3 a.m., the building let out its usual settling noise, a long creak in the pipes, a pop in the wood, the neighbor's toilet, and my eyes closed for a second on their own. When I opened them, my phone had lit itself again and the Notes app was open to a blank page with a word typed. Just the first syllable of something, auto-completed engines trying to guess, LA. I stared at it until it stopped being letters. It's easy, in daylight, to build a narrative that makes sense. The police called back at 8:12 a.m. to say they found the sedan. There was no driver. The plates came back to a woman who, according to the officer's hesitant voice, may have had circumstances. He didn't name them. He said the door had a partial handprint inside, inconsistent with blood or oils, more like a rub through moisture. He said there were no signs of a collision. He said they found flat shoes placed like they'd been taken off carefully. He said, "We appreciate you calling it in." My sister texted at 10:06 again. The timing bothered me for no good reason. To say she was sorry she'd missed my call at 12:47 and to ask if I could help her next week with a move. Her screenshot showed the missed call on her phone as coming from my number, but the duration was 5 seconds, not one. Her voicemail showed a message 12 seconds long that she hadn't played because she doesn't open unknown voicemails. "It's from you," she said, such ordinary words. I asked her to forward it. She tried. Her phone refused. "It says the file is corrupt," she told me. Or something. The dashcam files should have made me feel sane. Instead, they did the opposite. I called the company to ask if the G sensor could trigger from temperature change or magnetism or vehicles passing in the opposite lane. The man on the phone said probably not, and then apologized as if he'd bumped me. He said the camera recorded every time it detected a sharp jolt. He said it was working properly. He said cheerfully, "You caught any meteorites?" I didn't answer. For 3 nights I didn't take the pass. I took the long way around through 5, adding 30 minutes to a commute I could barely stand. I didn't want to see the overlook. I didn't want to find out whether the handprint on the sedan's windshield dried to nothing in sun. I didn't want to be out there at 12:16. I slept a little, like a person who's drunk sleeps, hard and without dreams, and then with a spike of panic that puts you upright. The certainty of having heard breathing on the other side of the bedroom door evaporating in the daylight. It would be cleaner if the story ended there. If I said the fear softened and life reasserted itself and I found a way to laugh about it. But the pass is the pass and the world doesn't change routes for your comfort. On the 4th night, the warehouse manager asked if I could pick up an extra shift. I said yes because I am the kind of person who says yes even when I mean no. I left at 11:30. The fog was lighter that night, the kind that streams like smoke at ankle level. I promised myself I would not slow down and I would not stop and I would not look. At the big rock there was nothing. At the overlook, there was nothing. At the S-curves, the radio held a signal. My phone stayed dark. The reservoir lay still as oil. My hands loosened. The world felt possible again. That was the false sense of safety they warn you about in stories. By the last hill, my breathing had evened. The digital clock ticked to 12:16 and I let the number mean only what it means. The shoulder widened and narrowed. My headlights licked the guardrail. Then from the passenger seat, from right beside my ear where no one sat, a voice spoke a single word, low and clear, as if through wet cloth soaked with lake water. "Back." The truck swerved. I corrected. The sound was fully inside the cabin, not outside, not the radio. Not a hallucination shaped like a memory. It came with a smell of damp fabric and bruised flowers that crawled up into my sinuses. The word wasn't a command. It sounded like a description, as if the voice were cataloging a position. "We are back." I didn't scream. I don't think I breathed. I did what you do when an animal darts into the lane and then disappears. I narrowed, I focused, I made myself small and linear and all-purpose. I didn't stop. I didn't stop. But I have never wanted to stop the way I wanted to stop then. Not to get out, but to let the truck shudder still and see whether the air held. If a story can be a stitch, that word sewed something into me. I made it home. The porch light dimmed and brightened. The doormat stayed flat. The door camera recorded 1 minute of absolutely nothing, and then refused to upload it, with the sort of error message that is too cheery to be honest. My phone showed no new calls, no new logs. My sister didn't text. The building breathed. 2 days later on my lunch break, I scrubbed the truck. I took a vacuum to the floor mats until the rubber squealed. I washed the inside of the passenger window with vinegar water to make the glass squeak. As I wiped, the cloth snagged on a roughness I couldn't see right at the place where a person's head would rest if they leaned near the glass. I turned the light on. The cloth had caught on a tiny raised fuzz in the upholstery, like paper fiber glued and then torn. I rubbed it. It came away in pilled flakes. When I lifted my fingers, a thin line of moisture clung, then broke. That night I did something stupid again. Or brave, depending on how you tell it. I watched the dash cam clip from the second drive, the one where nothing happened, frame by frame. At the timestamp 12:16:02 for 2 frames, less than a blink, there is a shimmer in the glass of the passenger window. Not a reflection. A shape inside the glass the way a bubble is inside ice. Tall, thinner than the space should allow, distorted by the curve of the lens like a person standing where a person cannot stand. The shape seems to tilt their head, not toward me, away. As if listening for someone else I can't hear, I could drag this out. I could catalog every time the porch light dimmed. The days the word lake auto-completed when I typed something that began with lay. The way my hand smelled sometimes like damp coins after I drove, even when I hadn't touched anything. The calls from unknown that I never answered because I am not a person in a cautionary tale, and because I know better now. The motion alerts from the camera at exactly 12:20 even when I wasn't home. The way my own voice sounded in my apartment some nights like it belonged to someone taller, like there was a second, quieter track under the first. The way the doorknob felt colder on the inside after midnight. Once, about 2 weeks after the first night, the police called to ask if I could come to the station to answer a few follow-up questions. The officer's tone had the careful blankness of someone who has seen a thing they don't yet know how to explain without making it worse. I went. The fluorescent lights there had the same humming safety as the gas station and the same nausea. The officer, a woman this time, asked whether I'd seen anyone else on the road, whether I'd stopped for longer than I'd said, whether I'd changed lanes. She did not ask the one question I wanted her to. Did you hear something that shouldn't exist? At the end, she closed the case folder and said, "We get a lot of calls from that stretch." She added softer, "Don't stop again." "Even if you think you should," I said. Because guilt and honesty are cousins, I should have helped her. If she was real, if she needed help. The officer looked at me in a way that made me think of the word back again, that made me want to fold into a smaller shape than my skin allows. "You called," she said. "Sometimes that's what help looks like. I don't know what happened to the woman with the flats. I don't know what waits in the brush by the overlook. I only know that the pass has its story, and the story uses us like thread. You can sew cloth with your eyes closed if your fingers already know the pattern. I still drive the 152 sometimes when I have to. I keep the radio on and the windows up and the dash cam rolling. When the fog gets that saturated, drowned wool look, I talk out loud because it helps. Small nonsense sentences like "I'm not stopping" and "we're fine" and "it's just weather." I don't look at the big rock. I don't look at the overlook. I don't look at the empty shoulder where a sedan might sit with its hazards clicking out of rhythm. When my phone lights up once with nothing new, I don't touch it. When it lights again, I don't either. If I hear breathing, I keep mine steady and pretend I don't. On the good nights, the porch light doesn't dim. On the bad nights, the doormat stays flat anyway. That is sometimes worse. I said earlier that they tell the story wrong. They always say if you slow down, she smiles. If you stop, you never leave. That's not how it works. She doesn't care if you slow down. She doesn't need you to stop. She's already listening. She's already learned your route and your door camera, and the way you draw silly faces on fogged mirrors and the shape your bare feet make on a mat with a pineapple. I think she picks who talks back. I think she chooses who has to tell the story. I think, and this is the part I hate admitting, I think I invited it by thinking I was doing the right thing. That's the line, I guess. Not bravery or fear. The conviction that you can help. Would you have done the same? If you take that road, if you see her, don't say anything out loud. Words can be a kind of permission. Don't look back. Don't look next to you. Keep your hands at 10 and 2. Let the fog be just fog. And if you ever get a call on your phone that rings once and stops, with no name and a timestamp that lines up a little too neatly with a turning on the pass, don't call back. I still live here, but now I never look out the window after 3 a.m. The first lantern didn't look haunted. It just didn't belong to anyone. Bodie sits out there beyond Bridgeport like a town pulled halfway from a photograph. Buildings hunched in a basin of wind, windows smeared with dust as fine as flour. If you've never been, the road in feels too long and too quiet, like the car itself is choosing not to interrupt the place. I had been to Bodie 3 times before, but last winter I took a seasonal job sleeping there as a caretaker. I told friends it was cheap, quiet, good for my thesis, and I said it like I believed it. I did believe it at first, because on the first night I unloaded my groceries, checked the generator, rolled out my sleeping bag in the Ranger trailer, and listened to nothing but cold air moving between empty streets. The sky gets black out there. Not suburban dark, not city black, but a low-oxygen kind of dark that folds around you. My routine was simple. Keep people out, keep heat in, keep notes for weekend tourists. I had a radio, a worn keyring, and a binder of rules. Rule 3 was scrawled, not printed, in felt tip at the back. Take nothing. Not a nail. The ranger who trained me winked about it. Bodie's curse. Steal something and you invite it back to your house. Footsteps. Misfortune. Returned by mail with apology notes written in anxious block letters. He'd shown me a stack. I laughed and promised to respect the dead, the living, and the museum inventory. The first night was quiet enough that I heard the trailer's baseboards expand. Around 2 a.m., I stepped outside and the cold slid into my mouth like a coin. My breath was a small white animal I could hold for a second and release. The wind combed the sagebrush. Somewhere a metal sign ticked against its post. And downhill beyond the schoolhouse and the Methodist church, a little yellow tremor appeared between two buildings, not bright enough to be a truck, not steady enough to be a porch bulb. At that hour, any light means work. I pulled on my parka and walked down the wooden steps, the planks complaining under my boots. The lantern, let's call it that, though I kept waiting for it to resolve into someone's headlamp, slipped out from between the livery and an old assay office and moved toward the general store. It wasn't fast. It was patient. I cupped my hands and called out, "Hey, park's closed." The words bounced down the street and came back smaller. The lantern didn't answer. It paused behind the store window, throwing amber ropes across the dust. When I got there, nobody stood on the other side, just boxes and mouse droppings and the counter with its glass case. The light itself had withdrawn, and the alley was a sleeve of cold black. The snow moon had climbed and the world turned blue. I waited, exhaled. A nail scent, copper and wet, met me when I stepped in the wind. The church door, swollen shut earlier, shifted and settled like a breath drawn and held. I told myself what you would tell yourself. Someone cut through. A hiker's errant flashlight. Reflection off a car on the highway. I added a line to my log. 209 suspected trespass, no contact. It felt done. 2 days later, the weather pinched down. I woke to a trailer that smelled like dry plastic and coffee. My phone, though it had no service, still kept time like a stubborn wristwatch. I used it for photos and notes. The sky was a pale lid. In winter, Bodie sounds like paper. You can hear your own eyebrows move. I spent the day checking windows and clearing a path to the outhouse. After dark, I sat at the tiny laminate table and scrolled through photos of my first week. The schoolhouse globe frozen in chalk dust. The rusty boiler in the mill. A row of bottles on the saloon shelf. When one of the pictures glitched, I assumed my phone had gotten too cold. It was an ordinary shot of the street at dusk, but a faint band of yellow cut diagonally across it, like a seam of light had been stitched into the JPEG. I swiped past it, back, past it again. The seam moved. I pinched to zoom and the light guttered as if it were truly there and struggling with wind. Clicking through quickly made the sequence look like a flipbook. The ribbon became a shape, became a lantern raised and lowered by somebody out of frame. You ever watch pixels mimic something they shouldn't know? My stomach did that small, mean clench it does right before a first date or a first fight. I locked the phone, then unlocked it because that would fix it. The light faded when I made it small, then brightened when I opened it like it was aware. The room had that dryer lint warm smell of the space heater, and I remember wishing it smelled like anything else. Around midnight, the trailer's door closed by itself. I know how that sounds. It used to stick because everything swelled or shrank with the cold, but I'd left it ajar for air and there was no wind then. The latch tongued home with the careful carelessness of a person trying not to make noise. I stood. My mug made a hollow ceramic sound against the table. The space heater clicked off and for a moment I just heard me. My throat, my circulation, my sweat breaking cold along my back. My fingertips felt dry and glassy and there was a faint, old smell. Laundry that had been put away almost, but not completely. Dry. Okay, I said to the empty air, conversational, like you do when your brain wants the illusion of control. We're not doing drama tonight. The door stayed closed. My breath came out in two, then I realized the second exhale wasn't mine. It was inside the door, lower, and a beat later a ghost would if a ghost had lungs. Would you have left right then? Because I didn't. I opened the door. Cold air rushed in as if the night had been waiting with its mouth to the crack. I shone my flashlight into the yard, the beam slashing through frost. Nothing moved but the straps on the propane tank whispering on their hooks. 100 yards to the east, a yellow body of light shifted behind the warehouse and put out the briefer, dimmer light you get when a lantern's flame dips and recovers. It was close enough that I could almost hear the wick scratch like a tiny animal inside glass. I grew up in apartments. I never learned how to be alone in a place that wants to be empty. Maybe that's why I talked more than I should have. Tossed my voice around like it could fill a larger shape. Park's closed. I called again, softer this time, like I didn't actually want to wake anything. The light pointed somewhere that was not me. When I moved left, it did not track me. That should have put me at ease. It didn't. 3 days into the job, I pocketed a nail. I'm telling you that because I keep thinking that's when everything shifted from superstition to debt. It was iron and crooked, bent like a finger that had been broken and set wrong. I found it under the floorboard of the bakery steps, and because there were dozens, because they'd rattled under my boots all morning, because I wanted something to weigh down the edge of my notebook so it wouldn't flip in the wind, I slid one into my pocket. You ever do something small and understand that you've made a specific kind of mistake? That night the wind shifted. It came in colder and it brought a metallic taste. The generator's rhythm hiccuped once, twice, then steadied. My phone lit up with no notification. The screen showed 3:07 a.m. and then 3:08 a.m., without passing the seconds like time had smoothed over a wrinkle, and called it intentional. I unlocked it and found a new entry in my voice memo app, something I hadn't recorded. It was only 2 seconds long. It was titled by the phone automatically with the timestamp, 4030703 or 0912. I pressed play. One sound. Not a word. Faint breathing from too close to the mic, like someone had watched me sleep and wanted to prove it gently. The recording popped and ended. I told myself I must have hit the button by accident. I keep telling myself that, and I know how it sounds. I tried to be rational. I texted my friend Nora in town, even though my phone would hold the message in its tense little fist until the next time I drove out. When you can you swing up? Got weird lights. Need second sanity. It stamped at 3:11 a.m. and waited accusingly. By late morning, the road had turned to unice. Nora arrived in a white Subaru with 2 travel mugs and a grin that said she wanted to see my haunted mine, more than she wanted to help. She's the kind of friend who stayed when we both aged out of college bars. She wore a knit beanie and leaned on the trailer doorframe like a character in a snowbound movie. You look like something got into your coffee, she said. Bad dreams? You'll laugh, I warned. I'll monetize it, she said. I'll make you a channel. We walked the streets. The sun pried at everything. Wind shoved at our coats. When we passed the general store window, she stopped. If you stare long enough, she said, you can see yourself blink back. We kept moving. And every 3 or 4 buildings I felt the same shift I'd felt that first night. A pocket of colder air. Not wind, not shade. Something like the temperature you get when you open a freezer. And the kitchen is 72 degrees, but the little fog rolls down over your hands anyway. There was a smell too, old bread and a blown-out match. You smell that? I asked once. Pickles, she said, squinting at a shelf of cloudy jars, or the ghost of pickles. I told her about the lanterns and the voice memo and the way the door had closed. I told her about the nail quietly, as if I were confessing to the place through her. She gave me a look. You're returning it, she said. That's like the only rule. It's just a nail, I said, and heard the echo of every bad choice I'd ever made. I needed a paperweight. We spent the afternoon drinking dangerously hot coffee and pointing at stuff that couldn't hurt us. We even joked about a false sense of safety, because phrases like that belong in podcasts, not in your throat. Around 4, Nora left. She took the lower road. I watched her car until it was just light flaring off glass at the curve. The trailer felt different when she was gone. My shoulders climbed, and the air stopped tasting like her scarf and started tasting like iron and old winter. At dusk, the lights came back. Not one this time. 3, like a small procession keeping a careful funeral distance from each other. They moved along the spine of the main street, and then they split. One angled toward the schoolhouse, one sank toward the stamp mill, and one stopped. Just stopped, in the middle of the street, so that if I'd been at a second-story window, I could have leaned out and dropped a key into it. I did the responsible thing and turned on the exterior lights of the trailer, which is funny, if you think about it, because it implies I believed my bulbs had authority. The lights pressed back a slick hemisphere around me. The nearest lantern, the one that had stopped, dimmed when I dimmed mine. When my generator's sound dropped a fraction for a second, the lantern took a needy breath and brightened, as though they were connected across something I couldn't see. Some part of me wanted to go to it, to hold the black handle above its glass and feel the heat. To identify the fuel? To prove a person existed at the end of an arm. I stepped off my stoop. The wind was low. I could hear my boots whisper on the road. The lantern waited. That verb is precise, waited. I drew even with the schoolhouse sign and stopped. The sign moved a little after I did, as if it had watched me, considered, and then decided to be breeze-touched. I think that's when fear shifted from question to posture. I stood wrong. My mouth opened. I had the smallest, dumbest thought. If I spoke, they would learn my name. I didn't speak. I lifted my phone. Something about having a rectangle between me and a thing makes me braver. The camera app opened on black. Then the autofocus blinked on the little white square as if there were a face in the nothing. My screen brightened and the lantern resolved. A memory of a lantern built out of pixels. Behind it, my brain insists on this, a person-shaped absence. Not a silhouette, not a shadow exactly, but a place no light could settle. My thumb quivered. The flashlight function came on without my telling it to. A beam spilling out beneath the phone and painting the ground. The lantern dimmed like it was embarrassed. I flicked the light off. The lantern breathed back. I snapped 3 photos. The shutter sound, artificial of course, a recording of a camera that no longer exists, cracked the air in that tinny way. When I looked down, the photos were there, 17-23-12, 17-23-12, 17-23-13. In the first one, the lantern was centered, glass flecked. In the second, it had drifted a little left without motion blur, as if it had teleported the width of a hand. In the third, there was my face in the blackness by mistake, the camera catching my reflection in something behind the lantern. And in that face, me, my expression was not the one I was making. My mouth was open in the third photo. It wasn't in real life. I turned around, slowly. Because the body learns to go slow in the way you learn to stand up better after you've fallen once in front of people. Behind me, the trailer door hung slightly open. I had not left it that way. The porch light buzzed and flickered, a fly trapped in amber. The cold shoulder of air pressed at my back like a careful palm, guiding me where it wanted me. I stepped backward until my calves tapped the step. Inside, I shut the door loud. I shouted, "Stop!" I don't know to whom. The heater clicked. The window to the left of the table fogged in the shape of a human breath. One long, condensing arc. Then nothing. And then, several seconds later, the sound that has never resolved into anything else in my memory. Footsteps in the trailer, near the tiny sink, going toward the back. Not my footsteps. The wrong cadence. Too slow, as if the floor were farther away for whoever stepped there. I did what scared animals do. I made myself small. I put my back to a corner and held the radio. I pressed the call button and let it squawk. "Station 1, I said, hoping someone on night duty was awake. "Any units on the air?" Static molded for a second, then a voice I recognized, a weekday ranger named Miguel, came in sleepy and grainy. "Copy, Station 1, you good?" "Lights," I said. "Trespassers, I think." "Can you roll county?" "Can," Miguel said. A pause long enough for me to hear him sit up. "Stay put. Lock it down. You got eyes?" "Just out of view," I said. "They don't come close." His sigh scratched through the speaker, that foff sound of a thumb on cloth near a mic. "Don't go out. It's cold, wait." He signed off. Waiting is a skill. The sound in the back half of the trailer didn't continue. It didn't do anything good like resolve into a mouse. It just didn't unexist. The smell of old ash returned, the kind that clings to sweaters on the morning after a fire. My phone lit up for no reason. 17:28. The screen brightened, then dimmed like a sleeping animal resetting itself. I scrolled to my security app. The trailer had a motion-activated camera facing the door. My last 3 motion events were from me going in and out, time-stamped with indifference. Then a fourth, new 17:24:09. I pressed play. The footage was simple. The door was closed. Outside, the faint smear of yellow pacing in and out of the edge of frame. Nothing else. Then at 17:24:12, the door opened an inch. No hand, no knob turn. It opened the way it might if someone pulled from the inside with 2 fingers and care not to be heard. A few seconds later, it eased shut. The camera, which sometimes struggled with focus, did not struggle. It recorded an event and gave me nothing to hang it on. You ever get the feeling someone has learned your schedule like an algorithm learns you? The next 2 nights, the lights returned at the same hour and split the same ways. One hovered by the trailer long enough that the security camera turned on again and caught nothing but a bright smear, like someone had pressed a teardrop against the lens from the outside. The voice memos multiplied without my input. Always 2 seconds, always that breath like it was disappointed I had not said my name aloud. I returned the nail on the 4th morning. I walked out in the hard, honest light and put it back under the bakery step. When I straightened, the church bell tolled once in its throat. No full ring, just a metal swallow, and I did not pretend it was wind. I said aloud in a voice I'd never used in a church before, "I'm sorry." 1 line. That's all. I meant it in the small way that you can ever mean an apology after the fact. It didn't help. The difference was only this. That night, the lantern stopped behaving like a general lantern and started behaving like mine. You know when you're certain you're being watched. Not in a paranoid way, but in the way you can feel a dog's attention from across a room. I woke around 3 with my chest tight and my teeth cold. I lay still so I could hear what had woken me. On the other side of the trailer wall, someone breathed. Not the winter. Not the heater. Slow in, slow out. Equal lengths. A pattern you start to match until you realize you've been keeping time with something that hasn't chosen you. The phone lit up without notification. 307. Then 0307 again, as if it had wanted to stay a little longer in that minute. The screen showed a missed call, just the icon. No number. It had rung once, apparently, and given up. The missed call log said unknown, and the timestamp was 030702. I untapped it. Nothing. The call details page was empty, like a face scraped clean. I sat up and the mattress made the sound. Mattresses make a soft, private complaint. The breathing outside slowed as if whoever stood there wanted to hear me without their own noise getting in the way. That's what undid me. Not the lanterns, not the door, not the camera footage. The courtesy of the thing on the other side, the way it cooperated to hear me better. I made a bad choice. I said, "Hello," not loud, not whisper. The way you'd answer if a neighbor knocked to ask for a jump. The breathing stopped. 3 seconds passed. Then a knock on the window, not the door. Knuckles on glass, the thin metal window frame making a handbell of the trailer. I flinched enough that my teeth came together hard. I went to the window. I took the stupid extra time to flip the lock up because even then I wanted the act to seem normal. The window slid up fast enough that the cold slapped my forehead. No face waited there to confirm the human possibility. I slid the flashlight beam into the night and there it was, 2 feet below the sill. The lantern. Not moving. Propped on nothing. The glass winked in my light. And above it, only when my eyes relaxed like you do for those hidden image posters, a patient dullness in the air like the shape of a person who had been erased badly. I wanted to touch it.
Do you hate me for that?
I wanted to ruin the distance. My hand went out. The heat from the lantern hit my skin an inch before contact and the glass chilled it again. I didn't feel a hand or a wrist. There was nothing to feel. Who are you? I asked. If you were writing this, you'd give yourself a better line. But there are not a lot of lines available at 3 a.m. in a ghost town. When something has come close enough to count your eyelashes. What do you want? The lantern brightened. Not a lot. Just enough to suggest eagerness. Then it went out. The absence was violent. The window turned into a square of night. My flashlight showed me a piece of unhelpful dirt. I put the light down, my hands remembering some rule about not being obvious prey. Footsteps went by my window then. Slow. Offbeat the way a person might step if they were wearing 1 boot and 1 shoe. They entered my trailer a few seconds later, if sound is to be believed, which after all this I'm not sure it is. The door did not open. The footsteps weren't fast. They were considered, like someone counting. They went to my table. They stopped near the radio. They stood there long enough that my breath stuttered in, stuttered out. I smelled wet wool. On the counter, a stack of papers shifted. The top one, my log, moved 3 inches to the right. Not slid gently. Moved like someone had picked it up and put it down. My mouth tasted like pennies. "I'm sorry," I said again, uselessly. I was no longer sure which apology I was making. The radio roared to life. Not with a voice. With that heavy, wet static the world makes when it wants you to know it has a throat. Then beneath it a shape of speech as if you were hearing someone talk from the bottom of a swimming pool. "Hold," it said. "Stay." I thought briefly it was Miguel. I pressed transmit. "Copy," I said. "I'm here." Silence, no return. On the table, the stack of papers moved back to the left exactly 3 inches, as though the act had been a test and I had failed or passed in a way that didn't change my grade. Around 4, The sound withdrew. It didn't walk back to the door. It went thin like cold milk poured into hot. The temperature lifted. The smell of wool left. I exhaled a little too loudly and hated myself for performing relief. In the morning, there was frost in the shape of fingers on the outside of the window. 4, not 5. Each a smear with a tiny clean circle at the center, as if the core had stayed warmer. The prints pressed down as if the glass had been a table. I measured them with a butter knife because I needed a human action to put against an inhuman result. They didn't match anything. I called Miguel on the day radio frequency when the sun stood up properly. "Did you call me at 3? I asked, my hand leaving a little clean ghost on the window where I had been holding myself up to ask. "No," he said. "I was off last night. Went home at 6. Why?" "You just sounded like you said hold and stay." He paused. "Recorded?" he asked. "Because we have to lie to each other gentle if we're going to keep doing our jobs." "On your camera?" "I'll check," I said. We both left it there because he wanted it to be nothing as badly as I did. I told myself to quit. I didn't. You probably wouldn't either. There's a calculus to terror. How much is curiosity worth? How much is rent? How much is the relief of telling the story after against the harm of living it first? I wrote nothing about it all in the official logs. I wrote it in a notebook I kept in the last drawer under a dish rag, as if I thought it needed to be muffled. I started sleeping with my coat on. It didn't help. It just made the sweat cold earlier. 2 weeks in, the visitors returned. A van of high schoolers on a field trip tumbled out like jokes, their teacher herding them with a red scarf. I did my presentation with cheerful facts about assay offices and stamp mills and the cost of eggs in 1880. The kids took photos with their phones, the signal blinking on and off in the wind. One of the girls, small and serious, raised her hand. "Is it true about the curse?" she asked. "If you take something?" "Mailroom has proof," I said, tipping my head toward the station. "More letters than you'd expect start with people who don't want to sound stupid and then decide they'd rather sound stupid than live unhappy." They laughed. It was a relieved laugh, the kind you make when you see a good adult's edges. Someone asked about the old safe. The teacher thanked me. They left smudges on the glass and the warm, wet smell of teenagers in coats. After they were gone, I found a little brass coat button on the schoolhouse floor near the piano, old and flat, greened at the edges. It had fallen from nobody's coat. It had sat a long time. I touched it and felt the softest hum in my teeth, a sympathetic vibration. I didn't pick it up. "You'll be proud of me for that." I made a circle around it with twine and 2 thumbtacks and a hand-lettered note. "Do not move, inventory." I stood up and heard the faintest footsteps on the stage. I turned my head and the curtains, which had not moved in a decade, sighed once inward and then back as if someone had walked past them slowly trailing fingers. Have you ever heard something that shouldn't exist? And then, an hour later, you almost convince yourself you didn't hear it? That's what the daytime between nights did for me. In daylight, rats reclaim haunted sounds and buildings return to gravity. In daylight, you feel silly rubbing your wrist where the air had held you. I made my day list: fuel levels, lock checks, snow fence repair. I noticed after lunch that my phone had saved the field trip in a little stack of photos without my asking. It sorted them by faces. It had made a new category labeled unknown, and inside were a few repeats of me, the teacher, 2 kids, even though the app usually recognizes and names the most frequent faces. In the unknown stack were also frames of empty doorways and dark hallways where the app had drawn its white little squares around nothing. I pressed one and the info panel said helpfully, "This face might be null." I laughed like you laugh unkindly at yourself. Then I went out to the bakery to replace the twine that had blown off my coat button sign. The button was not there. The thumbtacks were... The twine had been laid in a loose figure 8. It would have taken hands to do that, nimble ones, not mine in gloves. I stood and the floor answered me a second later with sound. Not echo, delay, I didn't sleep that night. And now you expect my panic to crest and break. It did, but not there. The hill of fear is weirdly long and shallow when you live on it. I kept trying to find the spot where it drops. That spot arrived 3 nights later on a Friday when I made my false safety on purpose. I left the porch light on. I made tea. I listened to a podcast with someone's friendly voice filling the trailer with the shape of company. The lights didn't come right away. The wind took a night shift again. I almost relaxed. That was the trap. At 03:07 a.m., my phone lit up once. It didn't ring. It presented me with the blue bubble of a received text and then took it away. No number. The notification shade said blurred because the sender field is supposed to be a name. Let us in. It stamped it carelessly, 0307. And then an instant photo icon appeared like the camera had been launched by something jerking it out of my pocket. Before I could close it, the screen showed me the live view of my own face in the front camera, convex, upside down because I was lying down, and behind me, a light on the window. It brightened. It wasn't the porch light. I sat up and the phone fell. The sound of it hitting the floor made the kind of echo only RV walls can give you, a hollow, embarrassed sound. The knocking began again, patient. 3 knocks, a pause, 2, a longer pause, 1. It ended with a whisper of something sliding slowly down the outside of the trailer, like a coat or a hand. Miguel's voice came on the radio, sharp, awake.
Station 1, you still up?
The relief was so physical my eyes watered. County's got a unit near Mono Lake. You want them to come up? I pressed transmit with a hand that shook like an old man's. Please, I said, and my voice broke into 2 voices, one that wanted to be professional and one that could not be. Please, on it. ETA 30, he said. Stay inside. The lights left. That's what shook me. They left, not fading, not mischiefing around the mill. They retreated like dogs who hear a car in the driveway and do not want to be seen misbehaving. The absence settled around me again, that soft, malevolent blankness. The deputy who arrived was 22 and overconfident and good-hearted in that way that makes you walk in front of him instead of behind him. We shined our lights at everything lights could touch. He touched every door the way a boy proves to himself the dark isn't for him. You've got wind, he said finally, embarrassed to say anything else. And you've got some local stories. And you've got too much night. You want me to hang out? Please, I said, which is not a word I used a lot before that job. He stayed until 5, when the sky got a lighter kind of black. We made jokes. He told me about his dog. When he left, he paused by the church. You hear that? He asked, returning to me suddenly with his head cocked. It's like someone's there. Wind, I said, and we both nodded like liars at each other. He drove off. I watched his taillights turn into ghost lights over the hills. When the cold came back, it came all at once, like I'd opened a door I didn't see. That morning, the security camera had a new event, 03-07-14. I pressed play. It showed the deputy on my porch drinking coffee, his breath cutting out of him like little factory smokestacks. He was talking to me, my shoulder and frame. When he looked at me, his eyes tracked an inch too far to the left and he smiled at the wrong space. He nodded, listening to nothing that looked like me, and then he raised his cup to nobody. There was no sound. The clip ended. I'll make this shorter because I now understand how long a story like this can drag and still feel like falling. The last night there, I did what the letters in the mailroom had all eventually done. I wrote one. I wrote it to the town. I said I understood what had been taken. Not just a nail, not just a button. Names mostly. That's what places like this lose. People leave and they die and their names stop being said out loud, and so the town walks around at night with lanterns trying to find its own. I'm sorry, I wrote again. It was the last time I wrote it. I'll say your names if you give them to me, I wrote. And when I wrote that, the radio hissed once softly, like someone had pressed their face to it to laugh without letting sound out. I put the letter on the church step. My hand left a clean print in the frost. For a second, the print looked older, as if it had sat a long time. The lanterns were not in sight, but the feeling of them, the attention, was like standing under a skylight you didn't realize was there. I went back to the trailer and began to pack. I wasn't scheduled to leave for 2 more weeks. I left anyway. I told myself I'd tell my supervisor about a family thing. I told myself anything that made the act feel like courage instead of loss. As I drove out, the town did not follow me. That was almost worse. The road rose and Bodie sank behind the hill. The sky opened. My phone finally caught service outside of Lee Vining, buzzing resentfully with all the messages I'd needed on time. There was one from Nora that had gone through at 0311 that first week. On my way. I had never gotten it. There was a voicemail from a number not listed, time-stamped 030703 on the last night. 2 seconds. I pressed play. Breath. I went back once in summer to return the key and pick up the box I'd left in the storage unit. Body is prettier then and worse. The tourists keep the doors open and the heat smears smells into a sweet rot. Old varnish, wool, petrified sugar. I went to the bakery, I don't know why. The note I had written about the button was still pinned to the floor, but the twine figure 8 had been changed into a circle. In the center of the circle was the brass button, returned with the softness of someone who didn't want to wake me. I live in a different town now. I keep fewer objects than I used to. Some nights, when the power drops for a second, like a breath being taken and given back, my phone lights up without a notification. The screen shows 0307, and then, when I blink, the correct time again. There is a 2-second voice memo called 030703.0912 that moves from folder to folder no matter where I hide it. It's nothing, I tell myself. It could be a system sound. It could be corrupted. It could be a prank I have somehow coordinated against myself. And sometimes, when I lie still and want the quiet to stay quiet, I thumbs up open the camera and point it at the window. The glass reflects a dim room and a face I recognize. Sometimes the face is making a different expression than I am. If I screenshot it, the picture saves with a location tag that says Bodie even when I am hundreds of miles away. I think about that stupid line in the rules binder. Take nothing.
Not a nail. And I think about all the other things we take without pocketing them.
There is always a price for naming what isn't ours. I still don't know whether what visited me belonged to a person or a place or both. I don't want to. I can live with that gap. But I will tell you this. If you go, and if you feel someone waiting outside your door like the air is holding itself up for you, don't say your name. Don't give the town anything with edges to hold. Don't open the window. If the lights stop at your house and breathe, pretend you don't hear them. If your phone rings once and stops at 0307, don't call back. The last thing I heard before the recording cut out was a single wet breath, like someone had just surfaced after a long dive and found there was nowhere to breathe. I'm an audio person, freelance, mostly cleanup and restoration for small documentary crews and podcasters who recorded in rooms that hate microphones. People send me bad sound and I give it back to them so their listeners don't write mean comments. It's not glamorous, but it pays enough of the rent on my studio apartment off Vermont in Los Feliz. You know the neighborhood, old mansions behind overgrown hedges, a constant rumor of coyotes and hills that catch the last light like they're hoarding it. That's how this started, with a job. A man named Preston emailed me on a Wednesday in October. He said he ran an estate sale company and had found a digital field recorder in a box of old linens at a property on Cromwell Avenue. The owner's last entry is unnerving, he wrote, and then added a line that stuck with me. If it's real, it's worth money. If it's fake, it's still worth money if it sounds real. I should have said no. I told myself I said yes because I needed the cash. The truth is, I liked the challenge. I liked the idea that sound, just sound, could haunt people without a single picture. It was hot that week. LA was doing that late October fantasy of pretending it was July, the kind of heat that smells faintly like hot dust and citrus. The day I got the package, I could feel the warmth radiating off the bubble wrap as I cut it open on my kitchenette counter. Inside was a Tascam DR40 scuffed with an elastic band holding a Sharpie-labeled index card to the back. Well, 10:23, 11:17 p.m. I didn't like the dash after the time. It looked like the recorder had more to say. I loaded fresh batteries and set it on the table. The little screen came to life with a faint green glow. Someone had named the only file Open, not subtle. I'm used to jump scares, to weird screaming and prank audios. I told myself it would be some teenager with a GoPro and a fog machine. But when I pressed play, all I got at first was air, and then a voice. Male, soft, with that careful hush people use when they're trying not to wake a sleeping house. Okay, the voice said. Okay, if this is stupid, I delete it. If not, I have proof. The microphone chirped as a fingertip grazed it. There was a faint metallic rattle like chains kissing. Then wind. The kind of wind you get moving over brick, making low vowels out of empty space. I paused and checked the waveform. It wasn't compressed to hell. The file looked like a heartbeat, quiet plateaus interrupted by sudden spikes. I pressed my palms flat on the cool laminate of the counter and hit play. Again, the man in the recording, he never said his name. They described an old mansion, with stucco that had dried into a map of rivers and islands. He said he was in the backyard behind a hedge of night-blooming jasmine, at something he called the well, with the certainty of a person reciting the title of a story they'd been told since childhood. "It's sealed," he whispered. "Chains, padlocks. But someone keeps cutting them, and every time they replace them, the chain is a little looser. People talk. They say there's a reason the family never filled it in." In the background, I heard a tiny crackle, a pebble skittering down stone. Under that, so faint I had to isolate the frequency. There was a tone like a mouth blown over a bottle. Low, steady, inhumanly patient. My refrigerator clicked off, and the sudden quiet made my own apartment feel like an empty stage. The ceiling light buzzed. I shut it and turned on the lamp so the room went amber, and the shadows in the corners deepened. There was a smell of old coffee I hadn't washed from the mug in the sink. The digital clock on my oven blinked 4:02, like it had been doing me that favor all along. I kept listening. The man was cutting through the chain with something. I caught the whine of a cheap angle grinder, the way the motor dips when it meets resistance. "Just one," he murmured over the noise as if he owed someone a promise. "Just one link." He killed the grinder, and the silence that followed was not silence. It was breath. Not his. His breath was quick, nervous, shallow. This was slow and damp and patient. It didn't rise and fall. It waited. "Hello?" he said, and the word echoed down. I stopped the playback. I sat there with my finger on the pause button and pretended my pulse wasn't making the entire apartment vibrate. I've cleaned up interviews recorded next to freeways and tried to rescue vows whispered in hurricane winds. I know when someone adds a sound after the fact, and I know room tone when I hear it. That breath wasn't added later. It belonged to the whole, the way scent belongs to a room. Have you ever heard something that shouldn't exist? I rewound and listened again, this time with my headphones pressed hard enough to leave 2 circles on my skin. There were other noises, a rope being fed through a ring, a bucket knocking hollow against stone. I could hear the man's shoes on brick, a scraping twist, nervous movement, and then faint, like it wasn't coming through the microphone at all but from the space between my ears, a murmur that shaped itself into words just long enough for my body to understand before my mind did. Lower. The air in my apartment cooled. I'm not exaggerating. The sweat slick on my forearms prickled and tightened. From the bedroom, a tiny draft found the gap under the door and pressed through, carrying a scent like rain on old cement. I turned to look, half expecting to see the door swing closed. It didn't need to. That's the thing about listening too carefully. You invite things to speak. On the recording, the man said, "I don't have much time." He told the recorder he'd been dreaming of the well for 3 nights in a row, and on the morning of the 4th, the chains on the real well had been cut. I told myself someone else was messing with it, he whispered. I told myself that. I told myself a lot of things. He fed the rope through his hands, and the fibers rasped like a whisper. The bucket dropped and dropped and dropped. You could hear a change in the air pressure, the way a shaft pulls at itself. When the bucket finally hit something, it wasn't water. It was soft. A sound like a towel falling into a hamper. He swore a reflexive little curse, and then he tugged. The rope came back heavier. I paused the recording and stood up very fast, like movement could interrupt a bad thought. I walked to the sink and ran water and let the white noise of it fill my head. My window was open 2 inches, and the street sounds were a collage. Someone laughing too loud, a skateboard clacking, a dog making its borders known. The smell of hot concrete came up like a memory. It was normal. It was so normal it felt like a joke someone was playing on me. I went back to the table. I pressed play, the rope scraped. The man grunted, then laughed at himself, embarrassed by exertion. "It's stupid," he said. "It's stupid, but if there's nothing, then I can stop thinking about it." Metal clicked against brick. He'd brought a crowbar. He levered it under the lid, gave a few effort noises, and something let go with a sigh like a mouth opening for a spoon. Chain slid. The lid shifted, light changed. That's a thing you can hear if you listen hard enough. The quality of the air around a microphone when a void opens. The man's breath went quiet, and then someone else exhaled. Not from a mouth exactly, more like steam being released under a thick cloth. If you've ever stood over a pot when you lift the lid, that first curl that hits your face, imagine it's old and heavy and aware of your face. "Hello?" The recorder said again, but it wasn't the man. It was his voice reflected back, pitched half a note down, stretched thin across something that didn't care about his vowels. "Hell, oh." I took the headphones off. I wasn't ashamed of it. I left the recording sitting there and walked out onto the tiny balcony my landlord called a Juliet, like that made it more romantic. It was 4:38 p.m. The sun was low, the mountains thin and smoky. Someone was playing piano badly in a nearby unit. Halting chords repeated until they got them almost right. Heat rose off the neighbor's grill and brought with it the smell of lighter fluid and fat. I inhaled until the smell made me dizzy. I stood there longer than I needed to because the apartment felt like it had learned a new word and wanted to say it. When I went back in, I told myself I'd finish the file and email Preston something professional and detached. That's how I justified hitting play again while the light went orange and the first long shadow from my bookshelf drew a skinny hand across the ceiling. I jumped at nothing and felt stupid for it, which is worse than fear. On the recording, the man lowered the microphone into the well on its strap. The sound changed again, the way sound goes when a space has so much space in it that it eats noise for fun. He whispered like he was telling the recorder a secret. I turned up the gain so I wasn't just listening. I was spying. That was when the first timestamp glitch happened. The recorder's metadata, yeah, I checked that. You'd be surprised how many fakes forget to fake the time. Had been steady the whole file. But at 00611, it jumped backward to 00412 for exactly 8 seconds and then forward again. Like time had slipped on a wet step, but caught itself before anyone saw. I paused, opened the file info, and verified. It wasn't my player. It wasn't my system clock. It was embedded. In my living room, the lamp flickered. Twice. A little insect banged itself against the lampshade like it was a drum, and I flinched because my body hadn't been asked if it wanted to stay brave. The air in the room smelled briefly like cold metal, the way your hands smell after touching coins too long. I kept going. The man whispered the way people whisper when they're in a church they don't want to admit is holy. He said there was something moving below. Something that didn't disturb the air so much as convince it to agree. I hear you, he said. And the voice that came back said exactly the same thing at the same time, except the mouth that said it didn't need to breathe between phrases. He laughed then, from nerves, and I hated him for that laugh because it felt like it named the thing in the dark. Something that listened, learned and smiled. You ever say something once and feel like the room held on to it? At 00734, the file clipped hard like someone had put a hand over the mic for a second. When the hand lifted, there was new sound layered in I hadn't noticed before. Distant, soft footsteps on wood. Not brick, not the garden, not the well. The specific creak of old floorboards giving back what they take. I froze because I knew that creak. It was my apartment. More exactly, it was the longboard between my kitchenette and the bathroom with the invisible hairline split that complains when you cross at night. I told myself someone had recorded over something. I told myself the field recorder had been used somewhere else and had ghost audio embedded in it. The rational explanation was obvious, except the footsteps matched the way I walked, avoiding that board at first and then forgetting and stepping right on it, an automatic habit beating a brand new one. The timestamp hiccuped again in that moment. Again exactly 8 seconds. Again backward. I sat very still and listened to my apartment listening back. At 0010:02, the man leaned in too close and his breath fogged the capsule and made it crackle. If I lower the mic, he asked himself, the recorder, the whole, will you speak? There was a sound like a throat clearing, but not from a throat, more like a drain, like pipes settling. And then a voice said, very small and very close to the mic, we are already speaking. I stopped. I wanted to delete the file out of instinct, as if getting rid of it would mean my living room hadn't just quietly held its own breath to hear that line. My phone lit up on the table. No notification, just the screen waking as if I'd tapped it. The display stuttered twice, brightness up, brightness down, as if it couldn't decide what to show. I picked it up and found nothing. No missed calls, no texts, no push alert, but in my recent calls list there was a single ring call, 001, from an unknown number with the 323 area code. The timestamp was 11:17 p.m. today. My little green oven clock said 5:12 p.m. It made me smile, nervous, automatic. I told myself that would be a glitch, a database hiccup. It's happened before. Sure, sometimes. I looked up the address of the estate sale. It was a few blocks away, of course it was. Los Feliz always keeps its ghosts local. Cromwell Avenue. A long run of shadows that sneaks up the hill toward the observatory until it gets bored. I Googled the listing and found the house. Someone had done the interior in an expensive anachronism. Heavy drapes, iron curtain rods, wood like good whiskey. In one of the photos, the realtor had gotten artsy and shot through the back door, out across a scrim of lawn to a hedge. Behind the hedge, if you knew what you were looking for, there was a circular dark shape like a missing coin. I shouldn't have gone. I know that now. But curiosity in me is not gentle, it eats. I told myself I wouldn't break any laws. I told myself I'd just look through the fence. You would have done the same, right? I put the recorder in my backpack. Don't ask me why. It didn't occur to me to leave it. Or maybe it did and I stepped on that thought like the loose board, hoping it wouldn't creak. By the time I walked past the Greek restaurant with its neon lamps and headed uphill, the day had that Santa Ana clarity that puts everything at the edge of crispness. Dry wind licked at leaves and plastic bags freed from somewhere, moved like ghosts convinced they had bodies. The light was the color of old bone. As I passed a set of stairs that claimed to go nowhere, I felt a sudden drop in temperature like I'd stepped into the shadow of a moving cloud. There were no clouds. The smell that came with the cold was chlorinated, like a hotel pool just after lights out. The mansion looked exactly like I'd imagined. Spanish Revival with a smug arch. A driveway that made you want to apologize for your shoes. There was a for sale sign out front, a hopeful number online and a smaller number out loud. The side gate off the driveway wasn't locked. It had that wealthy house habit of assuming politeness as security. I put my hand on the iron. It was warm as if it had swallowed the day and didn't want to give it back. I didn't plan to actually open the gate. I just pressed it a little to see how much give it had. The way you might prod a sleeping dog and tell yourself you're making sure it's breathing. It swung inward with an ancient little cry. The smell inside the gate changed. Cut grass, damp. Under the jasmine, something that wasn't sweet at all. Something like old coins in a pocket wet with sweat. The backyard had that careful neglect you see when money is waiting to be spent. Hedges held in place by firmer hedges behind them. A pool with a cover on it like a scar. The well was exactly where I'd seen it in the photo. Behind the jasmine, half wrapped in chain like a present the giver regretted. The lid was a heavy disc of metal set into stone, lip stained with rust. The chain looked new in places and old in others, as if loops had been replaced one at a time and the whole thing was a patchwork of caution that lost patience. The padlock hanging off the newest link had a shine like fresh molars. I didn't touch it. Didn't need to. Even 2 strides away, my skin responded to it like it was an open refrigerator on a hot day. The air above the well was cool in a way that had nothing to do with shade. It was cool like it wasn't air at all. A fly zigzagged toward the gap between lid and stone, hit something I couldn't see and fell into a tiny spasm on the rim. I don't know why that hurt me. Maybe because I recognized the mistake. Sometimes curiosity doesn't kill you. It just rearranges your ability to explain what happened. There was a small metal bucket to the side, old enough to have opinions about its own usefulness. A coil of rope lay beside it, sun-bleached on the outside and darker where the loops kissed. Someone had left the angle grinder too. It was plugged into an outdoor outlet that had a little plastic flap to keep rain out. The extension cord ran across the grass like a vein. I don't know who the man in the recording was. I don't know when he was here beyond the index card date. But the setup might have been his. Or maybe every decade, as the story goes. Whoever the well calls leaves tools in the right places like a stage dressing that keeps getting refreshed by new actors. I took the recorder out of my bag and just held it. It felt heavier than it should have. The battery icon pulsed full. On the little screen, the file open was still selected. The time said 11:16 p.m. That wasn't possible. Sunset wasn't for another hour. I tapped the case with my fingernail and felt the vibration come back through my skin. For a second, I had the idea that if I set the recorder directly onto the metal lid, the well would put its mouth on the microphone and say my name. I put my hand flat on the cold metal to prevent my own bad idea. The surface was more than cold. It was the absence of everything the day had been. Sound changed again. The backyard noise, the far hum of traffic, a plane etching a line you couldn't see, went thin. There was a beat. 2. And then, like it had been waiting for the specific map of my handprint, something breathed. I jerked my hand back and it stopped, just like that. I laughed, too loud. The laugh sounded like I'd dropped it by accident and didn't want to bend over to pick it up. I looked around as if I was about to meet a neighbor's eyes through a fence and be embarrassed. Nobody. The jasmine was so fragrant it hurt my head. I backed away, told myself I'd heard the wind through the chain, told myself I'd get pizza and watch something stupid. I walked out through the gate and put the recorder back in my bag, and I didn't look over my shoulder until I was on the sidewalk, because I didn't want to know whether something watched me leave. With the patience of a parent who knows their kid will be back when they get hungry. The light in my apartment was wrong when I returned. The lamp was on even though I was sure I'd turned it off. The air was cooler. The mirror in the hallway had a faint moistness to it, like someone had breathed on it and then erased what they'd written. I went straight to the oven clock and felt that small relief that maybe makes us human. It still said 6:02. I checked my phone. Recent calls. Another single ring, 11:17 p.m. The number had changed, still 323, still unknown. The time on my phone at that exact moment was 6:03. I took a screenshot. The screenshot's timestamp said 11:17 p.m. Would you call your own number if it called you? I didn't. I set the phone face down and kept the recorder out of its bag because the bag felt too much like a pocket, and pockets feel like promises. I loaded the file onto my laptop, set it into my software that shows you audio like heat maps, and looked for seams. If someone had layered my apartment floorboards into this recording to mess with me, I'd find it. There were no seams. The waveform was indecent in how honest it was. At 0021312, a click. The sound of my hallway light chain, the little metal beads kissing each other. At E01313, a distant breath. At U01314, my bathroom sink turning on for exactly 3 seconds. I stood in the doorway and looked at the real sink. It was dry. The faucet had a water spot shaped like a comma. I wanted to take a picture. I didn't move. The sound on the file continued without me. Footsteps through my one bedroom that I felt in the little bones of my ears as if they were happening in the next room over from my skull. At E014 Sire, the man by the well spoke again, but the voice had lost its ordinary. He sounded tired and young. He said, "I've been here before." Then he corrected himself. "I will be here before." The way he said it made me want to bite my own knuckles. He wasn't making a clever joke. He had found the place in the sentence where grammar wasn't useful. I did something then I regret because regret is tidy and keeps you from saying horror. I took the field recorder, set it in the center of my living room rug, and hit record on a new file. I wanted to see if my apartment was making that other recording happen all by itself. I wanted to prove the well hadn't followed me home. The new file sounded like every empty room. A hum at 60 hertz. The barely audible fizz of electricity flexing in wires. The neighbor upstairs making love like there was a simple recipe to it that required repetition. 2 minutes in, a small sound. A droplet hitting the metal lip of my bathroom sink, ring, then decay. I paused the recording and listened in real time. Nothing. The tap was dry. The sink was dry. The pipes made no fuss about any of it. Back in the software, I zoomed in on the droplet. It was beautiful and terrible, the way all precise things are. I checked my clock. 6 p.m. My phone lit up and then went black again. No notification. I rolled my chair back and it did the little bump over that floorboard, and I felt stupid for remembering that my callers had been dialing from the future of my oven. Long story short, I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw a circle. Not the well exactly, but the implication of it, the way it makes a room gather itself around an empty center. I listened to the file again and caught a line I'd missed the first time. Between the man's questions and the well's patience, a third voice had crept in. It was my voice saying, "Okay," in the exact tone I use when I'm agreeing to something I don't understand so the conversation will move on. I scrubbed back. It wasn't a perfect recording of me. There was an accent. My own words laid on top of another tongue like they were hiding something. Later, when I read that sentence back, I'll hear myself and think, that wasn't me, but it was shaped like me enough. Around 2 a.m., my clock's 8 a.m., my apartment ran out of ways to pretend it wasn't listening. The mirror in the hall breathed again evenly, and some condensation reappeared in the corner nearest the bedroom. A slow circle. If you've ever watched someone exhale onto glass to draw their initial, it was like that, except the breath was coming from inside the mirror. It took me a full minute to notice I was holding my own breath to match it. The Santa Ana winds were doing their nighttime thing, carrying dry air and the sound of someone's wind chimes figuring out their scale. A distant siren. The kind of night that would be beautiful out on the Griffith Park Trail. The city squares of light stretching hard-edged to the valley. I looked at the balcony door and wondered, If I opened it, would the cool air outside be more or less of a threat than the cool air already in here? I left it shut. At 3:07, my oven said 3:07, I swear, my phone rang. It rang once, stopped, unknown number. The call log wrote it down as 11:17 p.m. I considered that maybe someone was messing with me. Some estate sale ghoul with a sense of humor. But if that was true, the joke had too many moving parts. That's the thing about real hauntings. They're practical. They use what's around you. They don't need special effects because you supply them. I answered the next one. That's how dumb I am, or brave. Sometimes those words get drunk together and pass for the other in bad light. Hello? I said. My voice sounded like I was underwater and didn't want to admit it. The other end made a sound like holding, a conch to your ear and hearing not the ocean but something that has learned the ocean's impression. Then very softly my own voice asked, hello? Back, except I heard the thud of my heartbeat in the background and the chain of the hallway light clicking as if someone were playing with it in the dark. Who is this? I asked. We are already speaking, it said, smaller this time. And there was the gentle metallic kiss of chain kissing chain. The line went dead. I threw the phone onto the couch like it had done something to be ashamed of and sat there with my hands on my knees like I was making myself available to the idea of prayer. Outside, a car passed and the headlights made slow theater on my ceiling. The shadows moved wrong, slower than the car, delayed like a live stream buffering. I felt pressure in my ears. That's a particular sensation. Like the cabin of a plane during descent, except there's no altitude to explain it. Around dawn, my 11:17, the apartment exhaled. That's the only way I can describe it. The pressure lifted. The mirror dried. The lamp stopped flirting with the idea of flicker. There was a smell like a swimming pool right after the pump shuts off. In the silence that followed, I cried, unhandsome because relief is so close to grief it uses its dresser drawers. I did normal things the next day. I made coffee. I went for a run. I texted friends in a flurry of unrelated checking in that probably read like I was about to move to a different city or join a religion. I told myself all of it could be an elaborate prank. I told myself I could edit the file and send Preston something unremarkable, get my money and pretend the rest didn't belong to me. But it did belong to me. That's another horror no one tells you, ownership. Once a thing speaks to you in your own rhythm, it knows where to put itself in your day. Around noon, I got an email from Preston. We need to cancel Thursday's viewing. Something's come up at the property. Also, someone on staff says we need to change the locks. Do you know a locksmith? The kind of mundane admin that wears normal like a mask. Attached, he'd forwarded a neighborhood blog post about a string of odd noises in the area. Clanking at night, like pipework, and bobcats being seen too close to back doors. The comments were a war between people who think everything is a conspiracy and those who think nothing is. I closed the tab before I found myself in the part where my apartment would be a dot on the map. Have you ever thought you were out of a thing and then realized you'd just been allowed to breathe before the next wave? That afternoon, my building's security camera sent a push notification to the tenant thread. Visitor at front gate. I clicked the thumbnail. The image was smeared, cheap lens catching sun, but the shape was wrong. The camera had captured an oval shadow where a person should be. Not a ghost, please don't imagine gauze. It was like a fingerprint smudge on a screen that thinks it's showing you detail. At the bottom of the image, the timestamp was 11:17 p.m. I did something stupid. I went back to the house. This time I went at full dark because errors want stage lighting and I couldn't deny them that. The Santa Anas were still like breath held. The street was quiet except for the crickets doing their relentless arithmetic. The for sale sign had a sold sticker slapped across it in a diagonal that made a kind of brag. The side gate was locked. Good. Reasonable. The padlock glowed faintly with dew. I didn't break in. I stood there with my hand on the iron again and felt the cool. I don't know why, but I spoke. I don't have anything you want, I said. Take what you brought and go. Saying it out loud made it sound dumb and also made it feel like the only thing I'd been allowed to say. Words have a way of finding their leash. Behind the hedge, something shifted. Not big, not dramatic, just the weight of air reorganizing itself around an idea. I took a step back because I'm not a hero, I'm not even a protagonist most days. I'm an audio tech who lives alone and forgets to buy enough toilet paper whenever there's a sale. That's when the padlock on the gate made a small, polite sound, like a throat clearing. It popped open, swung, and came to rest against the iron with a thunk that belonged to something domestic and bored. The gate obligingly cracked itself an inch. I looked up and down the street empty, and then I laughed because why not and pushed the gate open. The backyard was colder than it had any right to be. My breath didn't fog, but my skin told me it ought to. The jasmine was huge in the dark, clusters of white like eyes. As I approached the hedge, one light in the house clicked on by itself. A hallway somewhere, warm and human-colored, offering me an exit if I wanted it. See, false sense of safety. I saw it for what it was, and I wanted it anyway. The well was waiting. The chain across the lid was not the same as yesterday. I recognized a new link. The padlock through it wasn't shiny anymore. It was the dull of a tooth that has seen things. The bucket had moved. The rope was in a different coil, as if hands had tried and failed to make it behave as it was born to. I'm not lowering anything. I told nobody, and the specific someone I meant. The recorder in my bag hummed just slightly, the way electronics do when they are aware of themselves. I set the recorder on the stone lip without touching the lid this time, and hit record and said, "If there's something here," no, I restarted. "If you can hear me, don't answer with my voice." It felt childish to say. It felt like telling a child not to cross the street without a grown-up. "Okay," said three voices at once. Mine, the man's, and a third that was both and not either. I flinched like I'd been slapped. The lamp inside the house went off. The backyard went black for half a second, and then the moon came back as if it had come up through the well. Something moved under the lid. Not the way bodies move. The way attention moves. You know that feeling when you're in a restaurant and someone at the next table says your name, and your entire awareness rearranges and tightens? That. Lower, it said. But softer this time. With the coax of a mother at a bathtub who knows she can be patient because the water is already running. Lower. No, I told it, and it wasn't brave. It was the only word I had left that didn't feel like I'd borrowed it from someone else's throat. The chain slid a fraction. I saw it, heard it, felt it in my teeth. A leak of cooler air escaped, carrying a scent that was both rotten and clean. Like the bottom of a lake covered in coins, the metal leaching something that made your tongue remember a taste from childhood you couldn't name. A breath came up and touched my face. It wasn't wet. It was dry. It was older than wet. "You've already been here," it said. "You will already be here. Who are you?" I asked. Because what else do you ask the dark when it's learned your vowels? "We are already speaking," it said again, and I hated it not because it was an answer but because it was a refusal to have shape. The chain rattled more boldly now. The lid shifted a lip width. In the black slit that appeared, nothing reflected. The light went into it and didn't come back. I grabbed the recorder and took a step backward and hit my calf on the hard edge of the pool cover and almost went in. The very normal household indignity of almost falling in a covered pool grounded me with a shock that hurt my knees. I laughed, hysteric and obvious, and the well exhaled like it was bored with me. Then, fast, more animal than thought, the lid rose. Not all the way. Enough. A pair of hands came out and found the edge. They were not corpse hands. I promised you no gore. They didn't drip. They didn't claw. They were clean. They were my hands. My left wrist had that little crescent scar from when I tried to open a can in college with a butter knife. The right middle knuckle was flattened a bit from punching a wall that had turned out to be a load-bearing column when I was 22 and stupid sad. They were my hands. They gripped in my exact grip. The only difference was that the nails were a fraction too pale, as if they'd forgotten what light does to keratin. "Don't," I said to myself, to it, to the world that lets a sentence like that be possible. The hands didn't pull. They just held. Testing. Like someone stepping onto a rung of a ladder to see if it would take weight. The chain went tight. The padlock made a small complaint. The jasmine shook without wind. Inside the house, a drawer slid open, the sound traveling clean through the night like a suggestion. "I'm sorry," I said. And it was not to the well. It was to the man whose voice I had borrowed by pressing play. It was to the version of me that might have slept through this if I were a kinder person to myself. I did the only thing I could think of. I started talking. I talked like you do to a scared pet in the vet waiting room. Nonsense sentences with gentle heat. "It's okay," I said. "Not tonight. You can sleep. Not tonight." I don't know who I was trying to seduce, myself, the well, the night. The hands loosened, just slightly. the way hands do when they're listening. The chain was a guitar string now, humming under tension, harmonics shivering. Lower, it said again, and this time I heard a lilt that made the word almost a question. Like lower, yes? No, I said again. No. I backed another step, found that safe long board in my own terrible apartment under my feet even here, and retreated onto it the way you step onto a rug that's never done you wrong. I grabbed the angle grinder like it was a weapon. That made the thing in the well laugh, not human laughter, the respiration of many small mouths behind a single word. My fear finally did the useful thing fear sometimes does. It suggested an action. I shoved the bucket into the gap. It caught wedging against the lid. The hands, my hands, released the edge, and an annoyance like low thunder came from below. The chain relaxed by an inch. I kicked the bucket again so it wedged better, a ridiculous act like propping a door with a shoe. I ran home with the recorder thumping my back, the way heartbeat and footfall sometimes become the same rhythm when they're both louder than your idea of yourself. At my door, my keys were not where I'd expect them to be because none of this was. I dropped them, swore, laughed at my own swearing, and finally got in. I shut the door. I locked it. I put the chain on because chains are what we use when we can't admit we want to feel strong. The apartment accepted me with the relief of a dog you've left too long, jumping, whining, licking. The oven clock said 11:17. In the new file from the well, the last 20 seconds were unusable, wild clipping as I ran, the lens cap of the night slapping at the mic. But if you isolate the low frequencies, you can hear the hands letting go. You can hear me whisper, "I'm sorry," and you can hear another voice say it at the exact same time, a half tone low, and then you can hear water. Not a splash, not that. The absence of a splash. The sound water makes when it decides a shape isn't worth remembering. Since that night, I've tried to work. Clients send interview files where someone knocks a coffee mug against a table just once, and suddenly I'm in a backyard smelling pennies and jasmine. Loud noises are fine. It's mouths I can't stand. The way breath makes a vowel. I sleep with a towel laid across the hallway mirror like a stupid charm. It doesn't help. The towel is just colder in the morning where my name would be if a hand wrote it in steam. I still have the recorder. Yes, I know. I should throw it away. Drive to the desert and drop it at the base of a saguaro and let wind make its choices. Or mail it back to Preston with a note that says sold in block letters and no return address. But some nights, I'm not proud of this, I press play. Not for long. Just enough to hear the well breathe once and know it hasn't forgotten me. That's the guilt part, I guess. I did this. I pressed the first button. In my call log every night, there's a single ring at 11:17 p.m. I stopped answering after the third time it said my name in a voice that understood how my mouth fits around my own vowels and liked it. The security camera in the building recorded once more. The front gate easing open by itself, the timestamp wrong. A faint round darkness where a person would be, like a thumb pressed softly into the world. The footage was gone by morning. My neighbor says the camera uploads glitch when the temperature swings. Sure. Sometimes. Last week, I heard distant footsteps in my empty apartment when I was making coffee. They were soft, but they came from the bathroom and paused at the hallway. I kept pouring like performing normal could change anything. The phone lit. No notification. You want to ask why I still live here? You want to ask why I don't move? But where would I go? There's no address you can write on a box that keeps a circle from finding you. I'm telling you this because maybe you've seen the house. Maybe you've walked past that hedge and smelled jasmine that hurts your head and heard a low tone in your teeth you couldn't name. Maybe you've heard that the chains get loose every 10 years and you've rolled your eyes because the past lies often. Maybe you've felt your own breath come back to you wrong. Would you have done the same? Would you have pressed play? I won't tell you the full truth because I don't have it. I have this, a metal lid, a chain that changes, a number that calls and writes itself down later than it rang, a mirror that remembers what my breath looks like from the other side. I have a sentence that sounds like an answer but isn't. We are already speaking. If you ever hear water resting on the other side of a locked door, don't open it, no matter how softly it says your name. The first time I heard it, I told myself it was just the wind doing what wind does in a narrow place. Maybe that's still true. Maybe I'm the narrow place. I should back up. I moved to Calabasas for the quiet. Weekday mornings where the 101 hums like a distant tide and the hills look like folded velvet. My new apartment faced west, and if I stepped onto the tiny balcony, I could see the ridgelines where Malibu Creek carves a path toward the ocean. That's why I started hiking the canyon after work. I'm not some survivalist or influencer. I just needed a routine. The kind that feels normal enough to hold your life together even if it's actually made of thin string. The first week was all ordinary. I learned the trailheads and the time the parking lot gates closed. I figured out where the creek pools, even in August where the sycamore shade hangs low and cold over the water like a second sky. The rangers were friendly in that practiced way. Back before dusk, one said, tapping the face of a watch with 2 fingers. Light goes fast in there. I nodded and said I would. I meant it. By the 3rd week, I knew the smell of the place. Sun warmed, sage dust kicked into a fine cough by trail runners, a clean mineral note when the wind came down the canyon as if rinsed by distant snow. The air does a thing there around 5 p.m. It cools without warning. The light goes gold and then iron in minutes. The shadows stretch across the trail, slow and heavy, like they're dragging something you can't see. One Monday evening, still, in normalcy, still trying to be a person who goes outside, I took the side path that climbs to a lookout over the creek. It's not official. It's a narrow cut over loose rock, and if you slip, it's a long slide to the bottom that ends in a mesh of chaparral and whatever bones coyotes haven't carried away. I went alone because that's what I do. You probably think that's stupid. Would you have done the same? At the top, I set my phone on a flat rock and shot a short video. Nothing special, just 15 seconds of canyon, to send to my sister and prove I was trying to be better than the version of me who sits in the dark until midnight and then scrolls until 2. You could hear the crickets winding up. A bird made a sound like a dropped coin in the brush. From where I stood, the creek looked like a black belt unrolled along the floor of the world. Then the wind rose and carried a thread of sound, high and thin, up the slope. I remember freezing because it wasn't one of the familiar canyon voices, the rustle, the creak, the dry clack of yucca against yucca. This went on longer than wind goes on. It tightened and lifted, turned keening around a single note the way a kettle finds its whistle. And just when it hurt to listen, it cut out. Not a fade, a knife. My phone, face down on the rock, brightened like it had received a notification. No buzz, no sound, just a white rectangle waking up for nothing. I picked it up without thinking, and when I did, a layer of fine grit left an oval on the screen like a handprint, my handprint. I wiped it with my shirt. The canyon clocked down into a colder silence than you get in the suburbs. I laughed, breathless. Okay, I said out loud. It's just wind. On the walk down, a gate clanged miles away. Coyotes started up, a stitchwork of yips and laughter pulling itself across the dusk. The smell of dust grew wetter somehow, like riverbed. When I reached the car, the radio in the next parked car flickered on, off, on again, and then stayed dark. Nobody was in it. The driver's seat held the shape of a jacket, nothing else. That night I texted my sister the video. She responded, "Looks pretty. Be careful of mountain lions." Then another. Also, what was that at the end? The video had recorded longer than I remembered, and after the planned 15 seconds, there were 9 more seconds of black with just a sound, the thread I'd heard, the thing that found its whistle. In the last half second you could hear a breath, not mine. I wasn't close enough to the phone. I told her it was probably wind. I wrote probably twice and deleted one of them. The small things came and went for a while. Tuesday. I found my keys on the wrong hook. Wednesday. My phone would light up at 12:07 a.m. and show a blank lock screen for no reason. Thursday. I woke to the sound of the balcony door sliding and lay paralyzed with the feeling of a cool strip of night air across my bare face. I waited for footsteps. Nothing. In the morning, the door was still locked. It was just the building cooling, I told myself. Buildings make sounds. That's what buildings do. Every 3 or 4 days, there'd be another sensory glitch to feed the part of me that collects them. The whiff of something like eucalyptus in my stairwell at 2 in the morning, when there are no eucalyptus trees near my building. A smear of ash on my knuckles after I touched the inside of my car door. A damp edge in the carpet by my bed, as if someone had leaned over a glass until it poured without spilling. I kept hiking anyway. It became a test I gave myself, and I passed if I kept moving set for set like a metronome. Car door, hat brim, trail dust, breath. The next time the scream, let's call it the scream, found me, I was below the old rock pool. The trail there narrows between slabs that hold the day's heat even after the sun drops. I squeezed through sideways, the brush scratching 1,000 insect sounds against my pack. The creek smelled metallic, like coins and algae. When the sound started, I didn't register it as a voice. It was a pressure first, a tightening of the drum of the world. Then a ribbon of pitch threading out from that pressure like someone had pulled it taut and then plucked it. I stood very still. It rose. I felt it in my throat like I had a scream, stuck there too, and it was trying to crawl up through my tongue. It cut off again, sudden, surgical. A fish breached in the pool with a single lazy slap. Over the water, the canyon wasn't as dark as it should have been. It's hard to explain this. The shadows didn't fall the way shadows fall. They lagged. They moved a half-beat behind everything else like badly synced subtitles. The leaves shivered, and then, a fraction later, their darkness caught up in a soft sliding motion. It was dusk. That's when they say it happens. Not they, like rangers, who'll say wind because wind is safe. They like the group of trail runners I overheard a week later at the Starbucks talking too fast. That caffeinated edge where fear and laughter sit at the same table. One of them said, "If you hear it, you're fine. It's when it stops." And didn't finish. I started leaving earlier after that, but I kept going back. Would you have? I told myself I needed to reclaim the place like it had been stolen, and I had a right to it because I was paying rent to look at a piece of it. That's the kind of entitlement that will get you killed, or worse, trapped. The first real disturbance happened after a storm. The hills looked rinsed, the sky a hard blue you could bite, and it would crack like candy. Water still ran shallow over the rocks, the sound of it a hiss in the low parts of the trail. I stopped at a bent oak that had been struck by lightning years ago. Char still runs down its middle like a healed scar, and when wind hits, the trunk rubs against itself and makes a low, wet groan. As I stood there, my phone buzzed. One ring. It stopped. No caller ID. I waited. I called back because I am the kind of person who calls back unknown numbers when they ring once. Nothing. A click and a breath, and then dead air. When I hung up, the call log showed the duration as 0000. It showed the time as 5:41 p.m. The signal bars on the top blinked and dropped and rose like a person nodding, yes, no, yes. By the time I reached the top of the unofficial lookout, the same flat rock, the same view unrolled, I had decided to go home and be done for a while. As I set my pack down, my phone brightened for no reason again, a white square in my palm. The wind rose out of the canyon, and with it, from far below, the scream. I don't have better language for it. It's not a word. It's not even a sound the way a violin is a sound. It's like the whole canyon takes a breath at the same time, and that breath is dragged across something too tight, too smooth. It pulls. It rises. It wants to pull something out of you. It wants you to lean forward and give it your face. I crouched down without meaning to. The rock under me was still warm. Pebbles pressed tiny, precise circles into the skin of my knees. The smell of water, dark, tannic, pushed up over the smell of dust. The scream turned sweet at the top, like the breath of someone who's chewed mint. Then it stopped. Something clicked behind me, 3 steps back. It wasn't a footstep. It was that sound doors make when they release their own weight, like a latch letting go but not opening yet. I turned slowly and saw nothing but the path, narrowing around the edge of the hill and the canyon falling away to the left. The shadows at the path's edge were longer than they should have been. They dragged their feet catching up to the real shapes that cast them. I started down. 3 turns later, I realized my pack felt lighter. I stopped and counted the weight. Water, yes. Jacket, yes. My first aid kit, no. I patted and unzipped, patted and swore. The zipper pulls the way metal teeth rasp. Do you know that feel when every small sound is suddenly a shout? It was like that. I looked back up the trail. I could see the flat rock, where I'd set my phone, heat still shimmering above it in a line as thin as fishing wire. The kit was there on the rock, exactly where I would have set it if I had taken it out and then, forgotten it? The hike back up was short, but the distance felt wrong, like my steps didn't go as far as they should. It's hard to explain. The shadows again, the way they lagged behind me as if my body moved through syrup in my shadow, through water. I grabbed the kit, stuffed it deep, told myself I was being stupid, and walked fast for the car. When I passed the lightning-struck oak, my phone gave one bright blink and died. The battery had been at 61% 15 minutes earlier. On the screen, somewhere below the glass, a thin line of light ghosted left to right like something inside it was pacing. I got home without incident. I showered. The water was colder on my arms than my chest, like I'd been walking with my arms out in front of me and my body closer to heat. I went to sleep with the kind of exhaustion that makes even worry feel padded. Around 1 a.m., I woke to a single ring again. I didn't answer. The screen lit long enough to show me the time, and for a second I saw the wrong time. 5:41 p.m., like earlier, before it corrected to 1:03 a.m. The log recorded no call. The next day, I went to the ranger station to ask a stupid question. I framed it like a joke. "What's that sound?" They smiled without letting the top half of their faces do anything. "Wind," said one, as if we'd both rehearsed it. "Canyon's like an instrument," said another. "Certain angles, certain temperature drop, it can whistle or howl. You'll hear people call it all sorts of things." Then he added, "We do lock the gate at dusk, though. Don't get caught in there after." "You'll be sighted," I nodded. "Of course." As I turned to go, an older ranger, this one with a face like he'd been in the sun every day since 1983, touched the edge of the counter with one finger and said quietly, "If you hear it twice in one night, leave. Don't turn around. Don't answer anyone. Don't answer anything that sounds like anyone." He wasn't looking at me. He was looking through the glass at the parking lot, like he was remembering something parked there once that shouldn't have been. I laughed because I didn't know what else to do. He didn't laugh back. I lasted 5 days before I went back at dusk. You can judge me. It's a fair judgment. I chose a different trail, one of the loops that cuts along the hillside and then switches down into the creek bed. It was a weekday, few cars. A white pickup at the far edge. A small sedan that had dusted its own windows into blindness. The air was sharp cold in my nose the minute I stepped out, even though the sun still smeared gold on everything. One of those weird microclimates where cold pools like water in a low bowl. As I rounded the first bend, I noticed the feeling of being watched. I'm not being dramatic. There are points on that trail where it flanks a steep drop, and you can feel eyes on your back because the houses up on the ridge have decks with telescopes and bored people. But this was different. This was below me, not above. I kept walking because sometimes the only way to not be afraid of a thing is to walk into it until the shape resolves into something you can name. The steps behind me were mine. Then they weren't. There was an extra one, a half beat late, a little heavier, the way a tall person follows a shorter person downstairs. You know that sound. You do. I stopped and the second footfall slid into silence like a hand slowly closing. My breath came uneven, the cold air hitting the back of my throat with a little sting. I turned around and saw the empty trail and the shadows pulling themselves back into place. Hello? Stupid, I know. Somewhere down in the creek bed, a rock turned over on itself with a dry scrape. I listened. The quiet filled my ears like packing material. No birds, no insects. The light, not yet gone, gathered itself flat against the slope across from me like a sheet. The smell of sun-baked fennel and dust thinned until there was only the faint metallic bite I've come to think of as the canyon's breath when it leans close. It was then I noticed a small thing that should have been bigger. The trail sign at the fork had been turned slightly, so it pointed between the two paths like a crooked finger unsure which way to accuse. I straightened it. The wood felt damp in the seam where the screws meet the post, though nothing else was wet. On I went. Every 3 or 4 paragraphs of memory, I remember one sensory flash with knife clarity, and here's the one from that moment. There was a strand of spider silk suspended in front of my face. It caught the low sun and flamed white for a second. It did not move in the wind. I had to step around it. The false safety came halfway through the loop. A park ranger appeared on the trail ahead, walking toward me with that steady gait people who are used to rough ground have. He was middle-aged, bearded, maybe tired. He raised a hand. I raised mine. "Evening," he said. "Evening." The relief I felt at a human voice was almost enough to split me open. Shameful how quickly we hand responsibility for our lives to strangers in hats. "You headed out?" he asked, glancing at the slant of the sun. "Gate locks in 20. "I am," I said. "Heard the wind last week. Don't want to push nap time." He smiled a little. "It's something, isn't it?" He stepped aside to let me pass, then added, "Stay on the main trail. Don't take the wash." He nodded toward a smaller path that led down into the creek bed. "People get turned around. Phone won't help you down there." "Thanks," I said. He looked like a person. The badge was scuffed. The soles of his boots had a small white line of salt near the heel from sweat that had wickered through and dried. When he turned, the leather creaked like old seatbelts. Everything checked. Everything passed. Why did I look back? I shouldn't have. I should have kept walking and passed the test of my own luck. But after a dozen paces, I turned to say something else. Some polite human, nothing like "have a good night." And he wasn't there. Not far away. Not at all. The trail was empty. No brush moved. No sound of footsteps, no radio static. The space where a person should be a few seconds after they wave and keep walking toward you was a space that had never hosted a person. I told myself he'd cut down into the wash fast. But he'd told me not to. Why would he? I called out, "Hey!" The word fell and didn't bounce. I swallowed and kept moving toward the parking lot. When I reached the last straight, the white pickup that had been empty when I arrived had someone sitting in the driver's seat. A shape, a body. The door was open but just an inch, just enough to break the seal. I couldn't see a face. I didn't want to. I found my car key by feel. The pouch zipper made that small metal grinding sound again. Too loud. The air around the cars was warmer than the air on the trail. Heat off the asphalt lifted in threads you could see. I got in and started the engine. The radio came on at a low volume with nothing but static and a faint rise of tone under it, like something trying to stack itself into a note. I turned it off. The pickup's door swung the rest of the way open. No one got out. I looked straight ahead and drove out. When I reached the gate, it was open. No ranger, no lock. The road to the highway looked like a mouth that had been told to smile and had forgotten how. I went home the long way on purpose. I don't like to pass places I've just escaped from immediately. That feels like disrespect. Like turning your back on the ocean without checking the water. You can think this is all me going crazy. People go crazy more softly than movies, whatever you think. It's a series of permissions you give yourself. You let yourself go back to the canyon. You let yourself answer one ring. You let yourself listen a second too long. When something enters through your ear, it doesn't leave. The night it went wrong, the panic, the revelation, whatever you want to label the heartbeat where my life forked. I didn't plan to hike. I'd stayed late at work. I stared at a screen until my eyes felt like they weren't attached to me anymore. A voicemail appeared on my phone at 7:09 p.m. No ring. Unknown number. I put the phone face down, but the notification was like a pulsar under my palm. I pressed play. Nothing. Then the sound of wind on a microphone, that deep muffled roar like you're listening from inside someone's mouth. Then a breath. Definitely a breath. Then my name. Half-formed, like someone starting to say it but stopping after the first syllable. A tone rose under it, sweet at the top. It cut out. I looked at the call detail page. The screen showed the call duration as 0009. Location Malibu Creek State Park. My body knew I was going before my mind did. I grabbed my keys, my jacket, the flashlight I tell people I always carry but never do, and drove. By the time I reached the parking lot, the light was almost gone. 2 cars, the white pickup, a compact car I didn't recognize. A cyclist strapping a headlamp onto her helmet looked at me and then looked away like I wasn't entirely there. I told myself I'd go to the ranger station. It was closed. The glass door reflected me more than anything behind it. Somewhere in the canyon, something metal clanged once, a single distant hinge in a big empty house. I should have left. I didn't. I went in. The cold met me fast, as if it had been waiting right behind the kiosk, like a person standing too close behind a door. My breath made a thin white line in front of my face. The flashlight beam picked out moths like tiny bits of snow suspended in strange gravity. I forced myself to walk in tens, count 10 steps, stop, breathe, count 10 more. The silence did what silence does when you go looking for it. It got heavy. It got mean. At the second bend, my phone lit up on its own. A single rectangle of cold light in my jacket pocket. One ring, it stopped. The lock screen showed a notification for a calendar event I hadn't set. Dusk. No time. Just a place, Malibu Creek. I swiped without thinking. The phone opened to a map. A blue dot for me. A red pin farther in, down near the old Mass H site where the trail widens and everyone takes the same photos and leaves the same footprints. I don't believe in being marked, but I followed the pin because I didn't want to follow my own thoughts. I walked faster than was smart. The beam jittered and the shadows trailed as if dragged by a rope. Each time I lifted my foot, the sound of my footfall arrived half a fraction late, like I wasn't synced with myself. The smell of water grew stronger. The smell of metal grew sweet. And then I heard it, the scream, and this time I knew the source was not the canyon alone, it was straight ahead. It was exactly where the red pin blazed, too bright on the map and too still on the water. It rose like someone was being pulled out of a lake by a rope tied around their ribs. It pulled something out of me too. Memory, panic, the last time I said something mean to someone I love. It cut off and the quiet slammed down like a door. Hello? I said because I have never learned. A voice said my name. Not like a question. It's like a thing a person says to themselves when they first recognize it in the mirror. The flashlight shook in my hand. I pointed it at the ground and then up, sweeping slow to not blind myself. For a heartbeat, I caught a shape on the far bank. It wasn't detailed enough to be a person, but it wasn't not. It stood, and then for a beat longer than a shadow moves, its shadow stood and then followed. I took a step back, and my heel found empty air. I windmilled and caught myself on a stone with my palm. Wet grit ground into my skin. The flashlight beam went wild and snagged on. Something pale to my right. A scrap of reflective fabric or a face turned the wrong way before it bounced up into eucalyptus leaves that shivered seconds. After they moved, the phone in my pocket vibrated. Again, once. Stop. I pulled it out, furious. Like the phone was doing this to me, like I could throw it and end it. The screen was on the call log. My outgoing calls. A list of numbers, each labeled unknown, each 1 minute apart for the last 3 nights at 5:41 p.m., each duration 0000. Under the most recent, a second entry, my own name, my own number, time-stamped right now. 8:22 p.m., I didn't touch it. The call connected. 9 seconds elapsed. I heard my breath, tinny. Then a voice that sounded like me played back my name exactly the way it had been said to me in the voicemail. And then the scream rose inside the call and outside me. 2 versions, slightly out of sync, a horrible stereo. At the exact same top note, both cut. The world went empty. I don't know how long I stood there. My legs shook so hard I thought my bones might rattle out of my body like a broom shaken to free its bristles. I spoke aloud to anchor myself to something. My name is redacted, I said. I am standing by the creek and everything is fine. That's a lie you tell when you want it to be true. The creek took its time answering in little licks against stone, like the mouth of a sleeping thing tasting you in its dream. When the footsteps came, they were mine from 30 seconds before, played back slower. I heard the exact skid of my heel, the exact little suck of breath. They approached and stopped a pace behind me. I didn't turn. The cold moved closer without touching. A smell rose, chaparral crushed under a heavy thing that left no track. And under that, a thread of something sweet like mint. My phone screen, dark again, showed my face like a lake shows the sky. Would you have done the same? I whispered, and I answered myself quietly just to keep my voice working. I don't know. I don't know. A hand brushed the back of my jacket. Not a hand. Not pressure. The absence of pressure, as if something had been pressing there all along and had lifted. I took 1 step forward and then another, and when I could move without falling, I walked. I did not run. Running changes you into prey. I walked the way a person walks through a hospital corridor at night. Eyes straight ahead, hands inside their pockets so the fingers don't trail along the walls. Behind me, my footsteps continued in a different rhythm. The parking lot appeared like a promise. The pickup was gone. The compact car was there. My car was there. I unlocked it with a beep I have never loved more. When I opened the door, it didn't chime. Cars chime. Mine didn't. Inside, the radio lit up and flashed the time, 5:41 p.m. It corrected to 8:39 p.m., then to 1:03 a.m., then to nothing at all. I turned the key. The engine caught and then stuttered like a person remembering something they shouldn't. It settled. I looked at the ranger station as I passed and saw just for a second the reflection of a man in the glass door waving. He had my jacket. When I got home, I placed my phone face down on the table and sat on the floor with my back to the couch, like a child who has fallen asleep during a scary movie. The quiet in the apartment had a thickness I didn't know it could hold. Then, from the balcony, a slow slide like the door testing its track. I stayed where I was. I didn't turn to look. I learned that much. I kept my eyes on the phone. It lit up. No buzz, no ring. The lock screen showed a still from my camera album, a photo of the canyon floor, water and rock and shadow. Except the shadows weren't where they should be. They were minorly off, like someone had carefully placed them wrong. A notification slid down from the top. It wasn't from any app I have. It was just a sentence. The canyon remembers every fall. I swiped it away and it came back. I swiped it away again and it didn't. Instead, the phone switched to the call log and refreshed itself without my touch. The top entry changed. It wasn't my number anymore. It was my sister's. Call duration U009. Timestamp 5:41 p.m. I pressed the side button and turned the phone off. The screen stayed subtly lit. I put it in a drawer. The drawer hummed for a second and then went quiet. I slept with the lights on for 3 nights. On the 4th, I went to the balcony and looked west. The ridgelines were just black paper cutouts held up against a gray sky. The canyon sat between them like a closed mouth. I tried to tell myself I had imagined most of it and misunderstood the rest. That's the final permission you sign when you want to live in the world. But the next morning, I opened my phone and found a new video in my library. It was 12 seconds long. It was the view from the unofficial lookout, the one with the flat rock taken in late afternoon. You could hear someone, me, say, "Okay," and breathe out. At the 6-second mark, the sound rose. The thing that pulls threads through your throat. And at the 9-second mark, a figure stepped sideways into the frame, a silhouette of a person whose shadow lagged behind by a beat, then caught up. The person wore my jacket. The lagging shadow wore something else. When the video ended, the thumbnail set itself as my background, just for a moment, like a trick of light that chooses you. I don't go back anymore. I mean that as a promise and also as a confession. Because the truth is, I still drive past sometimes on the 101 and turn my head like you do when you pass a past life. I listen to my phone. I am careful with time. I don't answer one-ring calls. You want a moral. You want me to say it was a person all along, a cruel ranger who liked to scare hikers, or a trick of the canyon, or something about infrasound and resonant frequencies. I don't know. The only thing I know for sure is how I felt when that absence leaned over my shoulder and corrected my name quietly. The way a loved one does when you mispronounce your own life. Maybe the canyon does remember every fall. Maybe it practices the sounds of our voices so it can return them to us at the worst possible time. Maybe it isn't the wind. Maybe it's the collected breath of every person who looked down and thought, "I could survive that," and then didn't. I still live here. I keep a jacket in my trunk in case I feel the urge to walk at dusk and need the excuse to take it off and leave a version of me behind on a flat rock. I don't text my sister after 5. I don't set calendar events for dusk. And when the balcony door slides a few millimeters in the night, I stay very, very still. And I count to 10. If your phone ever rings once and stops, don't call back. Maybe what you heard tonight was just a story. Or maybe it was a warning. Because in places like these, the darkness doesn't forget. It waits. If you think you can handle what comes next, subscribe to Nightword Echo, and don't miss the next descent into the dark.